The story begins with a glimpse into a digital escape, a realm known as Orbit Fantasy Online, where players express gratitude to the developers for creating a world of adventure. In the real world, the year is 2610, and a young protagonist prepares to disconnect from reality to find enjoyment in this virtual space. A login sequence initiates, bridging the gap between a mundane existence and the fantasy realm. The protagonist views herself as a standard high school girl, yet she acknowledges a deep-seated denial about her current state of living. In the confines of her room, she maneuvers a vacuum cleaner around hanging clothes and a large, round stuffed animal, going through the motions of domestic maintenance while internally disconnecting from society. She reflects on a lifetime of feeling unanchored, describing herself as merely floating around other people since childhood. This detachment escalated during her junior high years, where she ceased attending school entirely. Despite managing to take and pass her high school entrance exams, her will faltered, and she could not force her physical form to attend, leading to a realization that the act of living becomes increasingly arduous with age. To cope with this increasing difficulty, she retreats into online RPGs, substituting academic attendance with digital immersion. A flashback reveals her character creation process, where she meticulously crafted an avatar with silver hair and golden eyes, selecting the elf race to inhabit this new world. The game absorbed her completely. She threw herself into the mechanics and combat, battling monstrous beasts and horned demons with such ferocity and dedication that sleep became a secondary concern. The sheer enjoyment of the game provided the fulfillment reality lacked. The developers, known for their elaborate planning, kept the player base engaged with entertaining events, such as a Halloween spectacular. Even after clearing the main questline, achieving the maximum level, obtaining the title of Est Complete, and collecting every available item, the protagonist remained. Her attachment to the world persisted because it was the only place she felt a sense of purpose. During a specific Christmas event dated December 2nd, she found herself in a small, nondescript room within a cave, following a lead from a chat log posted by a user named Namashi-san. The chat hinted at a hidden room or a secret mechanic involving digging a hole in this specific location. Standing in the dim cave, her elven avatar opens the item box, scrolling through a list of mining tools. The inventory displays multiple pickaxe, ragged, and pickaxe, average, items, but she seeks something more potent. She acknowledges the presence of a secret passage, steeling herself for the task ahead. The instructions she follows are precise. Defeat the NPC, then follow the right wall strictly without looting any materials from the chest. Having arrived at the designated coordinates, she prepares to execute the dig. The interface displays a grid of high-level tools, and she selects a pickaxe, God, an item of SSS rank, designed for mining SS rank materials, noted for being single-use. The protagonist, feeling a sense of unease or perhaps anticipating the item's fragility, makes a meme reference joke about not feeling so good as she equips it. With a sharp exhale, she swings the divine tool down onto the cave floor. A crisp sound echoes as the pickaxe strikes the digital terrain, and then immediately shatters. The narration notes that the pickaxe broke, yet contrary to expectation, absolutely nothing happens to the environment. The protagonist pauses, sipping a juice box in real life while staring at the screen, noting the irregularity of the situation. She calculates that a tool with 200 durability or a God ranking should have been sufficient to penetrate the floor. She reassesses the floor layout, which is a 10 by 10 grid, and deduces she may have struck the wrong square. Correcting her approach, she decides to start from the top right edge of the grid. Quoting the proverb that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, she repositions her avatar. As she snacks on a bag of Haribo gummies at her desk, she initiates the mining action again. Her avatar swings the pickaxe with a vocal exertion. This time, the reaction is immediate and blinding. A massive column of white light erupts from the impact point, an effect the protagonist identifies as original and unlike anything she has witnessed in her extensive playtime. She stares in awe, shielding her eyes from the screen's brilliance. The system logs scroll rapidly, indicating the acquisition of a jewel, God, and noting the destruction of the pickaxe, but the visual feedback becomes erratic. The screen begins to glitch, the text becoming garbled and the interface dissolving into static. Confusion sets in as the digital world bleeds into a strange sensory experience. She questions the visual distortions, wondering if it is a picture book or a system error, but realizes the item box window is behaving incorrectly. Panic mounts as she attempts to comprehend the situation. She knows the logs indicated success, but the world she knows is fracturing. She asserts that despite her efforts, there are still aspects of this world she does not understand. The scene shifts to a monologue delivered on a cold Christmas night. The protagonist reflects on her sudden cessation of life. She realizes she died on Christmas Eve, a time when she was eagerly anticipating the next gaming session. Her last thoughts were a longing to play the game again, a regret that she could not continue. The narrative confirms that death in the real world typically means the end, but in this instance, a different fate awaited her. She accepts that it cannot be helped and acknowledges her reincarnation. Vision returns, blurred and soft. A woman with silver hair looks down affectionately, cooing at the protagonist who is now an infant. The baby realizes she has been trapped in a small body, unable to move freely. Her new mother smiles, calling her cute and a good girl, while the protagonist processes the fact that she has been reborn retaining the memories of her previous life. She observes her new parents critically. Her mother is a stunning beauty with silver hair, an elf, contrasting with her father, a human with a mediocre face but possessing golden eyes that the protagonist admits pair beautifully with his brown hair. The baby analyzes her own genetic inheritance, noting she has her mother's silver hair and her father's golden eyes, concluding with confidence that she is destined to be beautiful in the future. Time passes, and the protagonist struggles with the limitations of infancy. Initially helpless, she slowly learns to stand and eventually walk on her own, her determination fueled by her adult mind within a child's frame. During this period of growth, she sees a broadcast or perhaps purely environmental clues that lead her to a startling conclusion. She has been reincarnated into the world of Orbit Fantasy Online, her favorite game. Despite possessing the memories of a high school student, her physical capabilities, specifically muscle strength, are bound by the biology of a human-elf hybrid infant. Her father leaves for work, telling the baby to stay home, while she practices her speech daily, training her vocal cords to communicate intelligibly. She waves goodbye, managing a simple da-da sound. The door closes, leaving her alone in the rustic wooden room. She immediately shifts focus, her expression changing from innocent to focused. She attempts to summon the game's interface. A holographic screen materializes in the air, confirming her hypothesis. The status window displays her new identity, name, Reni Shiramogora. Age, 1. She scrolls down to the statistics, and the numbers are staggering. Her level is 999. Her HP is 99,999. Her MP is 9,999. Her strength is 5,000. The baby stares, shocked by the absurdity of the figures. She realizes that her game data has not only persisted but has been superimposed onto her new existence in this world. She celebrates this revelation with a toddler's clumsy enthusiasm, posing with a flexed arm while declaring herself the best in the world, though her pronunciation remains infantile. The realization implies that she is overpowered, carrying the legacy of her est complete title into this new life. Curiosity drives her to check the item box. The inventory list scrolls before her eyes, filled with rows of pickaxe, average, and, more importantly, stacks of 99, pickaxe, god, and recovery potion, god. She confirms that her entire hoard of items from the game world is accessible. A smirk crosses her face. With this level of power and resources, there is only one logical course of action. She decides to go on a journey. The narrative transitions to her aspirations. She visualizes the landscapes she had only ever seen through a computer monitor, now rendered in reality. She longs to see the Rain Lake, questioning if its colors are as outstandingly beautiful in reality as they were in the computer graphics. She recalls the long trek required to get there from Shortcut Forest and yearns to experience it physically. She imagines the Desert of Change, a location where the terrain shifts with the wind and falling sand, changing its layout every time one enters. She wonders about the enemies there, specifically those that imitate abilities, and how the dry wind feels against skin. Her desire is voracious. She wants to know everything, see everything, and enjoy this world to her heart's content, engaging all 5 senses in a way the simulation never permitted. However, a lingering thought interrupts her planning. She recalls the moment of her death and the item she mined, the jewel, god. She realizes she never had the chance to confirm its effect before dying. As she ponders this unfinished business, the sound of the door opening breaks her concentration. Her father returns, but something is wrong. He collapses onto the bed, his breathing ragged. The baby, Reni, watches with wide, fearful eyes as he coughs violently, a visceral sound hacking from his chest. He looks up, sweat beading on his forehead, and asks if everything is alright, trying to mask his own critical condition. Rennie is left staring, the joy of her overpowered status suddenly overshadowed by the immediate, fragile reality of her father's health. The dim, wood-paneled bedroom where the air hangs heavy with the scent of illness. Ward, the protagonist's father, lies supine on the bed, his breathing ragged and shallow as a small puff of white breath escapes his lips, signaling the chill in the room. He stirs, his eyes barely opening as he senses a presence near the bedside, weak and disoriented. He calls out, his voice a fragile rasp, questioning if someone is there. Rennie, the reincarnated protagonist currently inhabiting the body of an infant, stares up at him with wide, starry eyes. She acknowledges internally that Rennie is the name she carries in this new world. She watches her father, whom she identifies simply as Papa, struggle against his condition. In a display of infantile affection mixed with concern, she presses her face against the side of the mattress, making a soft, snuggling sound. The gravity of the situation weighs on Rennie's adult mind. She observes that her father, Ward, is currently ill, suffering from a disease contracted through a wound. Her internal monologue reveals the backstory. Approximately 1 month after her birth, Ward fell victim to an accident while hunting monsters. The consequences of this event have cascaded onto the entire family. Her mother, the silver-haired elf, has been forced to work herself to the bone. She labors tirelessly to afford medicine for Ward and food to sustain the household, pushing her own physical limits. Rennie feels the pangs of her biological clock. It is time for milk again. She sighs, acknowledging the cyclical nature of her infant needs. However, she refuses to be a passive burden. She engages in physical training, performing leg exercises and sit-ups within the crib to increase her stamina. She rationalizes that by strengthening her body, she becomes easier to handle than a normal baby, thereby reducing the physical strain on her exhausted mother. She fears that if her mother continues to overwork herself at this pace, she too will collapse. Meanwhile, Ward's condition shows no sign of improvement. In fact, it is gradually worsening. Determination hardens Rennie's expression. She decides that she must get everything back in order. She counts her blessings, specifically the fact that she can access and utilize items from her previous life. She recalls the properties of the legendary healing potions in her inventory, noting that they are effective against all abnormal status effects. Her primary objective crystallizes. She must restore her father's health. She is confident that administering one of these high-tier potions will cure him completely. Her plan extends beyond immediate medical intervention. Once her parents are healthy and the family is stable, she intends to address their financial struggles. She envisions using legendary fertilizer to grow super-rare produce on their land. By selling these rare crops, she aims to secure a substantial income. This financial buffer would ensure that her mother no longer needs to work herself to death. The ultimate goal is to create an environment where her parents can live in peace, even after she eventually sets off on her own journey. Now that she has confirmed access to her inventory, she resolves to do everything within her power to fix their lives. Rennie approaches the edge of the bed where Ward sleeps. She grips the fabric of the sheets, her small fingers digging in for leverage. She whispers a reassurance to herself, confident in her ability to handle the situation. With a grunt of exertion, she begins the arduous climb, pulling her small body up the side of the bed frame. Once established on the mattress, she invokes the magic command, her pronunciation still affected by her undeveloped vocal cords, Inwentui. The holographic menu materializes before her. She clears her throat and navigates the list. She scrolls past stacks of Potion O and S Potion O, locating the legendary healing potion. She selects a quantity of 1 and confirms the transaction. Having successfully retrieved the item and climbed the bed, she orients herself toward her father's sleeping form. However, a physical challenge presents itself. The potion bottle is massive relative to her size. She struggles under the weight, admitting that it is a bit too heavy for a 1-year-old body to manipulate easily. She examines the bottle closely. Contrary to her expectation of yucky-looking rainbow fluids, the liquid inside is actually quite pretty. Despite the weight and the awkwardness, she refuses to give up. She grips the cork stopper with both hands, her face scrunching with effort as she pulls. The cork is stuck tight. Rennie grits her teeth, her expression shifting into intense focus. With a sudden pop, the cork releases. She exhales sharply, wiping sweat from her brow, relieved by the success. She reflects that this kind of repetitive manual effort was something she performed every day in the game, triggering what she calls gamer mode. She maneuvers the open bottle, which is nearly the size of her torso, over her father's chest. She attempts to tilt it toward his mouth, but the weight shifts unexpectedly. The bottle tips too far, and the contents cascade out, splashing heavily onto Ward. Rennie freezes. She processes the scene. A former high school student, a reincarnator, and a max-leveled, overpowered entity, now reduced to a 1-year-old who just drenched her father. She lets out a wail of frustration, The narration dryly notes that her first attempt at helping in her second life ended with her wetting her father's bed. Ward wakes up, water dripping from his hair and face. He touches his wet cheek, confused, wondering where his daughter got the water. His wife rushes into the room, concern etched on her face, asking if he is okay. Ward sits up, noting the strangeness of the situation. This is the 6th time this has happened. Rennie, meanwhile, stands innocently in the background, holding a towel and pretending to engage in rope-pulling training to avoid suspicion. Ward laughs it off, thanking Rennie for pouring water on him while he slept, interpreting it as a prank or a clumsy act of care. Later, the family gathers. Ward is upright and smiling, a hawk moth fluttering nearby, signaling the return of vitality. His wife looks at him with immense relief, whispering her thanks to goodness. Rennie observes them, noting that although she failed to make him drink the potion, the liquid's contact with his skin was sufficient. The potion had an effect simply by being poured on him. Consequently, her father has fully recovered. Rennie sits on the floor, analyzing her parents' reactions. They seem to have no concept of where the healing potions came from, nor can they see the status screens she interacts with. She deduces that the people of this world do not understand the concept of inventories. She theorizes that the inventory system is an inherent skill unique to her as a reincarnator, a fact she is grateful for as it allows her to use it openly without immediate detection. Ward lifts Rennie into his arms, commenting on how heavy she has become. He speculates playfully about her behavior, suggesting she might be playing pranks because she likes him, or conversely, targeting him because she hates him. He wonders aloud if she might be a water mage, trying to rationalize the source of the fluid. Time passes. Rennie narrates that she turned 2 years old during the period she spent pouring healing potions on her dad. She holds up 2 fingers to her father, proudly declaring, "Aim 2 now," although her pronunciation remains imperfect. Ward beams at her, impressed by her growth. He prepares to leave the house, dressed in his outdoor gear. His wife cautions him to be careful. Before leaving, Ward asks Rennie to take care of Mama for him. Rennie salutes, promising, "Okay yesy, leave it to me." Once Ward is gone, Rennie turns to her mother and asks if she is going into the garden. Her mother confirms this. Rennie internally declares that it is time to execute step number 2 of her plan to aid her poor and overworked family. She assures her mother that Papa will be okay. Her mother agrees, suggesting they wait for his return together. However, Rennie is impatient. She announces she is going outside. Her mother asks for a minute to join her and instructs Rennie to stay where she can be seen. Rennie agrees with a lengthened, "Okay away." In the garden, Rennie surveys the land. It is a small vegetable garden intended to provide food for the family. She inspects the leaves and the potatoes. She notes that the crops are not doing well. The soil is exhausted from continuous cultivation on such a small plot. Rennie raises her hands and calls out, "Inventory." A holographic window appears, displaying a fertilizer, legendary, item. The description reads that it is an extremely good plant fertilizer that facilitates the growth of super rare materials. Rennie reflects that in the game, fields were merely collection points, so using them to actually grow vegetables feels refreshing. She summons the item. A massive, heavy sack materializes, landing with a heavy thud, "Zooin." Rennie hugs the sack, which dwarfs her small frame. She exhales, preparing for the work ahead. She visualizes the process. She needs to create nutrient-rich soil mounds for the plants. To do this, she realizes she needs a tool. She states aloud, "I want a spade." Her mother exits the house, asking what is wrong. Rennie repeats her request for something to dig with. Her mother's face falls. She apologizes, explaining that they do not have the money to buy a spade. Rennie nods, feigning acceptance, but internally she is shocked by the severity of their poverty. Her mother tries to comfort her, saying that she and Papa are doing their best. Rennie reassures her mother, "It's okay," and claims she will check around the house for something else to use. Rennie walks away, her resolve hardened. She acknowledges that she knew they were poor, but she didn't realize they couldn't even afford a simple spade. This reality check serves as even more reason to carry out her mission. She summons her inventory again. She searches for an alternative, something capable of scooping up earth. She finds a solution. In the next moment, she is holding a shiny, metallic object. A window identifies it as a ladle. The description notes it has virtually no attack power but makes cooking feel more intuitive, promising that the user can become a cute cook. Rennie notes that it is a really high-quality item. Her mother spots her and calls out, asking her not to go so far away. She notices the object in Rennie's hand and is confused. A ladle? She asks, questioning why such an item would be on their land. Rennie simply nods and claims she found it. Her mother, perplexed but accepting, tells her to give it back if she finds the owner and warns her not to prank the vegetables. Rennie agrees and marches toward the potato patch. Rennie approaches a mound of earth. She thrusts the ladle into the soil with a dish sound. The ladle scoops the earth effectively. She looks at the result with satisfaction, the fertilizer sparkling in the dirt. She affirms to herself, "I can do this." She prepares to repeat the process everywhere. She wipes sweat from her forehead, celebrating her success. However, looking at the expanse of the garden, she realizes this manual labor will take ages. Later that evening, inside the house, Rennie's parents sit at a table with mugs of warm drink. They discuss the day's events. The mother explains that Rennie claimed to find the ladle on the ground near the house. Ward clarifies, "In our garden?" The mother confirms the ladle appeared to be of really high quality. Ward suggests it might be magic. He reasons that ladles don't just lie about, so it implies a magical origin. The mother looks down, troubled, admitting she doesn't know how to make sense of it. She previously thought Rennie was a water mage, but now suspects she might possess an even more incredible power. She notes that she has heard of fire, wind, light, and dark magic, but never magic that simply gets things. Ward looks at his daughter, who stands innocently holding the high-quality ladle, and considers her heritage as an elf. Ward comes to a conclusion. He looks at his wife and declares, "Rennie's a genius." His wife agrees immediately. They stare at their sleeping daughter, who is tucked into bed. Ward decides that, for now, they must hide this ability from her. They agree to keep her power a secret until she is a little older, protecting her from the implications of her unique gifts. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy of the ancient, towering tree that overshadowed the humble cottage, casting dappled shadows across the thatched roof. Birds circled in the clear sky above the rustic dwelling, which, despite its worn appearance, stood sturdy against the elements. A young girl, Rennie, barely a toddler in appearance, stood near the wooden doorway, her small frame framed by the massive timber beams. She looked up, her large, expressive eyes fixed on the figure of her mother, a gentle woman with braided hair and a simple peasant dress, who carried a woven basket on her arm. The mother paused, turning back with a soft, protective gaze, instructing her daughter to remain indoors while she ventured out to harvest vegetables. Rennie acknowledged the command with a simple, obedient affirmation, her voice tiny against the vastness of the outdoors. Inside the cottage, the atmosphere shifted from the serene exterior to a bustling, yet cautious domesticity. Rennie sat at a sturdy wooden table, her small hands resting on a piece of cloth, while her mother prepared to leave. The mother's caution was palpable, her warning to not wander off hanging in the air. Rennie watched her go, the door closing with a soft thud that signaled the separation of the safety of the indoors from the unpredictable world outside. Meanwhile, behind the house, the father, a broad-shouldered man with short, cropped hair, hammered away at a wooden fence. His movements were precise and powerful, driving nails into the timber with rhythmic strikes. He worked with a sense of urgency, his back turned to the open fields where crops grew lush and vibrant. These were not ordinary vegetables. They were rare produce, high-quality greens that thrived under the family's careful, secretive cultivation. The father muttered to himself, his concern evident as he reinforced the barrier, desperate to shield their bountiful harvest from prying eyes. He knew that the sight of such valuable crops in the hands of a poor family would only invite trouble. Rennie, now alone in the main room, sipped from a wooden cup, the steam from the hot water curling around her face. She reflected on their situation with a maturity that belied her physical age. Despite the high value of the crops they grew and the father's recovery from a debilitating illness, the family remained destitute. She stared into the swirling water, her mind piecing together the economic puzzle of her existence. They lived in a paradox of production and poverty. Her father, once bedridden, was now active and working, yet their financial standing had not improved. Her thoughts drifted to the forest and the high-quality produce they harvested. She deduced that the disparity between their hard work and their empty pockets could only be explained by one thing: debt. She reasoned that her parents must have taken out significant loans, likely to cover the costs of her father's medical treatment or perhaps to survive during the period when he could not work. She calculated the timeline, realizing the financial strain likely began shortly after her birth, a time when her mother would have been unable to work and her father was incapacitated. The realization settled heavily upon her. It seemed impossible that they could still be drowning in debt despite their relentless labor and the sale of their premium crops. Her parents worked themselves to the bone, their bodies weary and their clothes worn, yet the gold never accumulated. A suspicion began to form in Rennie's mind, a dark thought that gnawed at her logic. She suspected foul play. It felt less like a struggle against bad luck and more like a deliberate scam. Suddenly, the tranquility of the cottage was shattered. A violent pounding echoed through the room, the wooden door vibrating under the force of heavy blows. Voices, rough and demanding, penetrated the walls, shouting for the occupants to open up. Rennie froze, her eyes widening as the aggressive shouts grew louder. The intruders knew someone was inside and had no intention of leaving. The door burst open, revealing two imposing figures. The mother, who had rushed back inside at the commotion, scooped Rennie into her arms, shielding the child with her own body. Her face was a mask of fear and defiance as she confronted the men. The lead intruder, a bald man with a scarred face and a sneer etched into his features, demanded the repayment of borrowed money. His voice grated against the silence of the room, filling the space with hostility. Beside him stood a younger man, equally disheveled and menacing. The thugs surveyed the interior of the cottage with blatant disgust. They mocked the emptiness of the home, their eyes scanning the sparse furniture and the lack of valuables. One of them picked up a piece of wooden cutlery, sneering at its cheap construction, remarking that it would likely break the moment it touched water. He tossed it aside, the clatter of wood on wood emphasizing their contempt. They declared that such meager possessions were insufficient to cover even the interest on the debt, let alone the principal. The mother stood her ground, her grip on Rennie tightening. She demanded they leave, her voice trembling but firm. She reminded them that she had already told them not to come to the house and, more importantly, that the loans had been fully repaid. The thugs laughed off her assertion, their demeanor arrogant and dismissive. The bald man produced a piece of paper, an IOU, waving it in her face as proof of the enduring debt. He pointed to the signature, claiming it made the document official and binding. The mother argued back, insisting that the payments they had made were substantial enough to clear the debt. The thug countered with a twisted logic, claiming that all previous payments had merely covered the exorbitant interest rates. He stepped closer, his physical presence looming over the terrified woman and child. He accused the family of constantly pleading poverty while sitting on hidden assets. His eyes roamed the room again, landing on the mother with a predatory glint. He suggested that if they truly lacked coin, there were other ways to pay. He commented on her appearance, implying that she could fetch a high price, a sickening suggestion that hung heavy in the air. The mockery continued as the thugs noticed a third chair at the table. They jeered at the extra seat, asking if it was for the dead kid, a cruel reference to Rennie, whom they assumed had perished or was being hidden away due to their poverty. The bald thug lamented sarcastically about the tragedy of losing a child to poverty, his words dripping with insincerity. He then turned his attention back to the mother, suggesting that she could easily clear the debt by selling her body. Rennie, tucked safely in her mother's arms, listened to every word. Her mind raced, processing the cruelty and the injustice. She realized that her parents might have been pretending she was dead to protect her from exactly this kind of predatory attention. The thought that she was a liability, a secret to be kept, sparked a fiery determination within her. She watched her mother, tears welling in the woman's eyes as she begged the men to stop destroying their home and their lives. One of the thugs reached out, grabbing the mother's arm, trying to drag her away. He leered, telling her that if she didn't want more misery, she should just come with them quietly. The mother struggled, her pleas becoming desperate screams. Rennie felt the shift in the atmosphere, the escalation from threat to physical abduction. She knew she could not remain passive. Suddenly, the doorway darkened again. The father stood there, his silhouette framed by the light outside. He did not speak, he moved with the momentum of a charging bull. His fist connected with the face of the younger thug, the impact resounding like a thunderclap. The man was sent flying, crashing into the wooden furniture, splintering it upon impact. The father roared, demanding to know what they were doing in his house. The remaining thug, the bald leader, recoiled in shock, his arrogance faltering for a split second. He stared at the father, assessing the threat. The father stood between the intruders and his family, his chest heaving with rage, his fists clenched and ready for violence. He ordered the men to leave and never return. In the chaos of the brawl, Rennie slipped from her mother's grasp. She moved with a stealth and purpose that went unnoticed by the adults, who were focused on the violent confrontation. She retreated to a corner of the room, hidden by the shadows and the overturned furniture. A blue, translucent screen materialized before her eyes, her inventory. Her small fingers danced across the holographic interface, scrolling through lists of items and equipment. She selected an item, Hermit's Robes. The description flashed on the screen, promising to block the user's presence and allow movement without encountering enemies. Rennie tapped Confirm. In an instant, a hooded cloak enveloped her small form. The fabric seemed to shimmer and blend with the surroundings, rendering her virtually invisible to the naked eye. She pulled the hood low, her determination hardening. She was no longer just a helpless child. She was a combatant entering the fray. The bald thug, recovering from his initial shock, sneered at the father. He acknowledged the man's strength but remained confident in their numbers and their leverage. He signaled to his partner, who was groggily getting back to his feet. They prepared to double-team the father, assuming that brute force and their reputation would be enough to subdue him. Rennie moved. She darted across the room, a silent phantom. She saw the bread that had been knocked to the floor during the scuffle, trampled by the thug's boots. The waste of food, the disrespect for her parents' labor, fueled her anger. She positioned herself behind the bald thug, who was focused entirely on the father. With a surge of surprising strength, Rennie struck. It wasn't a lethal blow, but a calculated disruption. She shoved the thug, unbalancing him. He stumbled, confused, looking around for the source of the force. There was no one there. He swung his arm wildly, hitting nothing but air. Panic began to creep into his eyes. He shouted, asking who was there. The father, seeing the opening, pressed his advantage. He lunged forward, grappling with the confused thug. The thug, distracted by the invisible assailant, was unable to defend himself effectively. He cursed, realizing that the situation was spiraling out of his control. He shouted to his partner that there was something else in the room, a ghost or a spirit. Rennie continued her harassment. She tripped the second thug as he tried to flank her father. He crashed to the floor, his face hitting the wooden planks hard. The thugs were now fighting a two-front war, one against the physically imposing father and another against an unseen force that struck from the shadows. Amidst the chaos, the thugs' facade began to crack. They shouted at each other, revealing the truth of their scheme. They admitted that the father, a former adventurer, was supposed to be a cripple. They had hired a monster to injure him in the forest months ago, a trap designed to incapacitate him and force the family into debt. They revealed that the father had been protecting his comrades when he was injured, a heroic act that the thugs had exploited. They mocked his nobility, laughing at how his comrades had sold him out to the loan sharks. Rennie heard it all. The betrayal, the orchestrated accident, the systematic destruction of her family's livelihood. It wasn't just greed, it was malice. They had targeted her father specifically because of his strength and his principles. They had planned to enslave the mother and sell the child. The depth of their depravity was bottomless. The father, hearing this confession, roared with a renewed fury. He wasn't just fighting for his home anymore, he was fighting the architects of his misery. He pummeled the bald thug, his fists delivering justice with every blow. The thug spat blood, his confidence shattered. Rennie decided it was time to end this. She retreated to her safe corner and opened her inventory again. She navigated to the weapons tab. She selected cat's paw gloves. The item materialized, replacing her hands with oversized, fluffy paw gloves. A pair of cat ears popped onto her head, and a tail sprouted from her lower back. The item description noted that the cuter the appearance, the stronger the punches. Rennie looked ridiculous, adorable, and absolutely lethal. She dropped the invisibility. The thugs, now battered and bruised, looked up to see a small, cat-eared child standing before them. They blinked, confused by the sudden appearance of this bizarre figure. The bald thug, wiping blood from his lip, laughed. He thought it was a joke. He mocked her, asking if she was the dead kid, come back to haunt them with cuteness. Rennie didn't speak. She stepped forward, her fluffy paws clenched. The bald thug reached out to grab her, thinking she was an easy hostage. Rennie dodged his clumsy hand and delivered a cat punch to his gut. The impact was disproportionate to her size. The thug's eyes bulged, the air expelled from his lungs in a violent whoosh. He folded over, gasping. The second thug stared in horror as his leader collapsed. He tried to scramble away, but Rennie was faster. She unleashed a flurry of strikes, cat's claw, tearing through their clothes and leaving deep, painful scratches. The thugs screamed, not just in pain, but in sheer bewilderment. They were being beaten by a toddler in a cosplay outfit. The father stood back, watching his daughter with a mixture of awe and confusion. He saw the power she wielded, the strange items she used. He didn't question it, he simply accepted that his daughter was special. He blocked the door, ensuring the thugs couldn't escape until Rennie was done. Rennie stood over the defeated thugs. She demanded the IOUs. The bald thug, terrified and broken, fumbled in his pockets. He pulled out a stack of crumpled papers. Rennie snatched them from his trembling hand. She scanned them, confirming her mother's signature. She asked if there were more. The thug shook his head frantically, swearing that was everything. Rennie wasn't satisfied with just the papers. She wanted to ensure they never returned. She grabbed the bald thug by his collar, or what was left of it, and dragged him to the open door. With a final, massive effort, she wound up for a cat smash. Her fist connected with his jaw, sending him rocketing out of the cottage. He soared through the air, traversing a comedic distance before crashing into the dirt far away. The text on the screen calculated the flight distance, 200 meters. A home run. The second thug, seeing his boss launched into orbit, scrambled backward, pleading for mercy. Rennie turned her gaze on him. She pointed to the door. He didn't need to be told twice. Scrambled to his feet and sprinted out, running past the unconscious body of his leader, disappearing into the woods. Rennie stood in the doorway, watching them flee. She took a deep breath, the adrenaline fading. She turned back to her parents. Her mother was weeping, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Her father was smiling, a proud, if battered, grin on his face. But Rennie had one last task. She knew that thugs like that were persistent. They might return with reinforcements. She walked out into the yard, approaching the boundary of their property. She opened her inventory one last time. She selected a scroll of avoidance unique. The item was a high-level tool used in gaming to prevent monster encounters while camping. She reasoned that if it worked on monsters, it might work on monstrous humans too. The ground was hard, packed down by years of walking. Rennie struggled to dig a small hole with her paws. She grunted with effort, the physical exertion taxing her small body more than the fight had. She placed the scroll into the earth and covered it up. She patted the dirt down, activating the magic. A subtle barrier rippled outward, invisible but palpable. She felt the safety settle over the house. Her task complete, Rennie slumped onto the grass. Exhaustion washed over her. She had defended her home, uncovered the conspiracy, and secured their future. She closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face. Moments later, she felt strong arms lift her up. Her father held her close, burying his face in her small shoulder. Her mother wrapped her arms around both of them, sobbing with relief. They stood there in the sunlight, a family besieged but unbroken. Rennie held the IOUs in her hand, the paper crinkling in her grip. It was over. The debt was gone. The threats were neutralized. The father looked at the documents, then at his daughter. He didn't ask how she did it. He didn't ask about the ears or the tail or the invisible robes. He just whispered his thanks. The mother kissed Rennie's forehead, calling her their savior. Rennie looked at them, her eyes tired but bright. She had used the tools of her past life to protect the precious reality of her current one. She realized that while the game mechanics were powerful, the true strength came from the bond they shared. She snuggled into her father's chest, finally allowing herself to be just a child again. The nightmare of the debt was over, and for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright for the family in the little cottage under the big tree. The scene faded as the family remained embraced, the peaceful sounds of the forest returning to fill the silence left by the violence. The birds sang, the wind rustled the leaves, and the scroll buried in the earth hummed with a quiet, protective magic, ensuring that no unwanted guests would disturb their peace again. Rennie drifted off to sleep, safe in the arms of the parents she had fought so hard to save. The aftermath of the battle left the cottage in a state of disarray, but the atmosphere had shifted from terror to a profound, exhausted relief. The broken furniture and the scuff marks on the floor were mere material damages, easily reparable compared to the fractured lives that had just been made whole. The father, still holding Rennie, moved towards the wooden bench that had survived the brawl. He sat down heavily, his adrenaline crashing, leaving him with the aches and pains of the fight. He examined his knuckles, bruised from the impact against the thug's face, but the pain was a grounding reminder of his victory. The mother busied herself with tidying up, a coping mechanism to restore order to her world. She picked up the wooden cutlery the thugs had thrown, wiping them clean with a reverence that spoke of her appreciation for what they had. She glanced at the door, half expecting the men to return, but the silence from the woods was absolute. The scroll of avoidance was doing its work, casting a repelling aura that acted as a silent guardian. Rennie stirred in her father's arms. The cat's paw gloves and the ears had vanished, returned to her inventory, leaving her looking like a normal, albeit disheveled, little girl. She looked at the IOUs still clutched in her hand. She handed them to her father. He took the papers, his rough fingers tracing the handwriting. He read the terms, the predatory interest rates, the clauses that would have enslaved them. He ripped the papers in half, then in half again, until they were nothing but confetti. He let the pieces fall to the floor, a symbolic destruction of the chains that had bound them. The mother joined them, sitting beside her husband. She reached out and took Rennie's hand. She looked at the child with a new understanding. She had always known Rennie was bright, perhaps too bright for her age, but the magic and the combat prowess were revelations. Yet, there was no fear in her eyes, only gratitude. She realized that her daughter was a reincarnator, or at least someone blessed by the gods with extraordinary gifts. It explained the maturity, the strange knowledge, and now, the power. Rennie looked between them. She didn't have the words to explain her inventory or her past life, nor did she feel the need to. The trust in their eyes was enough. She pointed to the garden, signaling that she wanted to go outside. The father nodded and set her down. She walked out into the field of rare vegetables. The plants were unharmed, their vibrant leaves swaying in the breeze. These crops, once a source of anxiety and secrecy, now represented their future. With the debt gone, the income from these vegetables would actually go to them. They could buy better tools, fix the house, maybe even buy meat for dinner. The dirt poverty that had defined Rennie's life in this world was coming to an end. She looked towards the spot where she had buried the scroll. A faint, magical shimmer was visible only to her, a dome of protection encasing their land. She navigated her menu again, checking the durability of the scroll. It was full. It would last for a long time. She felt a surge of pride. She wasn't just a passive observer in this world, she was a player who could change the game. Her stomach grumbled, a loud, unladylike sound that broke the solemnity of her thoughts. She realized she hadn't eaten since the morning hot water. Her mother, hearing the sound from the doorway, laughed. It was a genuine, light-hearted sound that had been missing from the house for too long. She called out that she would bake bread, real bread, not the stale crusts they were used to celebrate. The father stood up, stretching his sore back. He announced he would fix the door. He walked over to his tool belt, picking up the hammer he had been using earlier. The sound of him working, driving nails into wood, was no longer a frantic attempt to hide, but a constructive act of rebuilding. Rennie watched them, her heart full. The thugs were gone, the debt was destroyed, and her family was safe. She ran back to the house, eager to help, eager to eat, and eager to live the life she had fought for. As she crossed the threshold, the sun dipped lower in the sky, bathing the world in a warm, golden light, promising a tomorrow that was finally, truly theirs. The night sky stretched endlessly above the quiet forest, a tapestry of deep velvet punctured by the brilliance of countless stars and a sharp, crescent moon. Beneath this celestial canopy, the humble cottage sat nestled against the roots of the ancient giant tree, its windows glowing with the warm, flickering light of a hearth. Inside, the air was thick with a mixture of relief and lingering tension as Rennie's parents sat at their wooden table, processing the chaotic events that had recently transpired. Rennie, though physically a toddler, harbored a consciousness far beyond her 3 years, a fact she kept sealed away behind the guise of innocence. She acknowledged inwardly that despite her sealed status, she remained an overpowered existence in this world. Meanwhile, her parents engaged in a hushed, serious conversation, the candlelight casting dancing shadows across their weary faces. The father, looking at his wife with concern, confirmed the reality of their situation. The mother confessed the sheer terror that had gripped her when the suspicious men had invaded their sanctuary. She recounted the heart-stopping moment when, after the intruders were finally chased away, she realized Rennie was nowhere to be found. She had been certain she had hidden the child safely in the closet, and the discovery of an empty hiding spot had made her heart feel as though it had ceased to beat. Instead of her daughter, the mother had found only a single piece of paper left behind. The father examined the note on the table, the scrawled words, "Leave it to me," staring back at him. The mother explained that Rennie often used this specific phrase whenever she sensed her mother was troubled, a small gesture that usually preceded the child solving whatever minor problem was at hand. However, the scale of this solution was unprecedented. The mother admitted she never imagined her toddler would successfully retrieve the actual IOUs from the thugs. The father closed his eyes, a heavy sigh escaping him as he acknowledged that Rennie had not missed the opportunity to act, choosing a dangerous path to secure their freedom. They discussed the financial trap they had escaped. The father noted that they had paid the lenders as much as was demanded, trying desperately to keep the debt a secret. He lamented that they should have considered their options more carefully, but the fear of the IOU being made public had driven them to compliance. The risk was not just financial, it was existential, as the father pointed out that both the mother and Rennie were at risk if the lenders decided to escalate. The mother, her hand resting on her chest, expressed a profound gratitude for her daughter. She called Rennie a genius, stating firmly that without the child's intervention, they likely never would have overcome this crisis. She reflected on the blessing of Rennie's birth, a joy she hadn't expected when they first decided to build a life together. The conversation shifted to their past, a rare moment of vulnerability. The mother looked at her husband with soft eyes, affirming that she was still glad she had thrown everything away to take his hand years ago. The father reciprocated the sentiment, though his expression remained serious. The mother then pivoted to the future, suggesting that she needed to contact that girl, believing she would be the one capable of protecting Rennie effectively. While her parents planned for her safety, Rennie lay in her bed, her eyes closed but her mind alert. Suddenly, a notification window materialized in her mind's eye. The bell of perception had triggered. The item description clarified its function. It informed the user when it sensed enemy killing intent, essential tool for adventurers. The distinct tearing sound echoed in her consciousness, pulling her from her rest. Rennie sat up, her expression shifting from drowsiness to annoyance as the red enemies markers appeared on her visual interface, pointing towards the window. Rennie climbed onto the windowsill, peering out into the darkness. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted 3 silhouettes lurking near the property line. It had been a full week since she had retrieved the IOUs, and the persistence of these thugs astounded her. She questioned their intelligence, watching them skulk about with a sigh of exasperation. As she observed them, Rennie analyzed the events of the past week. Her father had spent an unusual amount of time playing with her, as if trying to make up for lost time, while both parents had remained indoors, fearful of venturing out. She deduced the root cause of the thugs' return. The surface piece was a lie. The IOUs were merely tools for blackmail and coercion. The true goal of the debt collectors had always been to abduct her mother. As long as they coveted her mother, the home would remain a target, and the harassment would never cease. This realization hardened Rennie's resolve. She decided firmly that this situation could not continue. With a few deft mental commands, Rennie accessed her inventory. She selected the cat's paw gloves, confirming the equipment change. Next, she selected the hermit's robes, the fabric shimmering into existence around her. Finally, she equipped the feathered rabbit's boots. The item description detailed their properties. Boots crafted from the feathers and hide of feathered rabbits, designed to increase movement speed and allow the user to enter jump mode. Rennie stood in the middle of the room, now fully geared. She noted the immediate effects of the boots. She felt faster and knew she wouldn't suffer from fatigue. She let out a small, satisfied chuckle, deeming the setup perfect. She reminded herself of her physical limitations. Despite being max level, her 3-year-old body exhausted quickly after running or walking for even short periods. The boots were a workaround, granting her enhanced mobility without the stamina drain. She clarified to herself that the boots did not grant flight, but rather amplified her jump height relative to the strength she exerted. Rennie approached the open window, her silhouette framed by the night. She declared it was time to beat up the baddies, and launched herself into the air with a powerful jump. She soared through the night sky, her robe fluttering behind her, before landing softly in the grass some distance away. From her vantage point in the shadows, Rennie observed the 3 thugs. They were caught in a loop of confusion. One thug stared at the empty space where the cottage should have been, asking where the house had gone. Another confirmed that a house was supposed to be there, scratching his head in bewilderment. They were victims of the scroll of avoidance Rennie had buried earlier. Rennie noted their behavior. They would approach the house, suddenly stop near the buried scroll, and then inexplicably head off in a different direction. She concluded that the scroll operated via mental interference, subtly redirecting their perception and pathing. The thugs' confusion began to curdle into fear. One of them stammered, asking his companions if they had seen anyone just now. The others denied it, stating they saw no one apart from themselves. The paranoia deepened as one thug admitted to hearing someone laughing, a sound Rennie had likely made intentionally. They questioned if such a phenomenon was even possible, describing the situation as strange and scary. The morale of the group began to fracture. One thug suggested they were wasting their time and should go back. Another proposed that it would be better to just leave the family alone. He reasoned that they had already made plenty of cash from the family and that chasing one woman wasn't worth the trouble. The suggestion to give up hung in the air, tempting them. However, the leader of the group, a man with a scarred face and a grim demeanor, shut down the dissent immediately. He insisted that they had no choice but to continue if they wanted to keep working in their organization. He argued that they had gone too far to pull back and that this wasn't just their problem anymore, it involved the boss. The leader emphasized that succeeding in this capture would improve their relations with the boss and ensure they never had money troubles again. Despite admitting he didn't understand the strange occurrences, he remained determined to figure it out and proposed returning during the day. The leader outlined a new, more ruthless plan. He noted that he saw the father often and that if they could catch him, the mother would have no choice but to come out. He reasoned that the family was definitely still in the village and would eventually have to leave the house. His strategy escalated to taking villagers hostage to force the father's hand, dismissing the father's strength as irrelevant in the face of leverage. As they turned to leave, aiming to work out the details back at their base, one thug paused, thinking he heard something again, but dismissed it. Rennie, having overheard the entire conversation, shadowed them. The scene shifted to the city of Slanida, known as the town that tells the time. The thugs walked boldly through the main gates, making no effort to hide their suspicious appearance, suggesting that the city permitted, or was at least indifferent to, their activities. Rennie questioned how they could be so careless as to lead her straight back to their base. The base in question was a fancy-looking building located just a block off the main street. Rennie recognized it. This was the financial institution where her mother had borrowed money for daily necessities and medicine for her father. She realized with disgust that the legitimate facade was merely a cover for the debt collectors. She mused that her mother never would have suspected that a transaction in such a respectable building would lead to this nightmare. Rennie assessed the situation. The corruption ran deep, and the thugs were merely pawns. She felt that if their only goal was selling her mother, the operation wouldn't be this involved. However, she decided that deep analysis could wait. She had other fish to fry. Her focus zeroed in on the boss the thugs had mentioned. She rationalized her upcoming violence by noting that her mother was as pretty as a goddess, implying that removing threats to her was a necessity. With a powerful leap, Rennie ascended the side of the building. She landed gracefully on the tiled roof, her boots absorbing the impact. She stood poised on the ridge, the star atop her hood twinkling against the night sky. She activated her skill, Cat's Claws, her gloves glowing with magical energy. Rennie struck the roof with tremendous force. The tiles shattered, and the timber beneath splintered loudly, the sound, gara-gara, echoing through the night. She tore through the structure, ripping open a massive hole in the ceiling. The text on the page described the destruction as the work of her expert handiwork, turning the dark interior into a starlit atrium. She cheerfully dubbed this destructive entry, Renovation Time, and Excavation Time. Inside the building, chaos reigned. The ceiling collapsed onto the thugs who had just returned. Debris, labeled wood and person, rained down in a heap. The impact was devastating, leaving the men buried under planks and plaster. Rennie dropped through the hole she had created, landing atop the pile of wreckage. She scanned the room, identifying the people on the left and wood on the right. Her gaze settled on the leader, who was pinned beneath the debris. She approached the unconscious leader and shook him, demanding he wake up. The man groaned, his eyes fluttering open to a scene of total devastation. He stammered, asking what had happened. Rennie, looming over him with her hooded face in shadow, informed him that they were going to have a little talk. She pinpointed him as the linchpin of the continued threat, noting that while the others were in favor of leaving her family alone, he was the one who had stopped them and convinced them to persist. Terror seized the leader. He screamed as Rennie grabbed him, forbidding him from running away. To his dazed and fearful eyes, the small, hooded figure with glowing eyes appeared to be an evil spirit or a manifestation of a curse. He shrieked, clutching his head, convinced that their misfortune was supernatural retribution. Rennie observed his terror with clinical detachment. She internalized that fear was one of the most important human emotions, a necessary survival instinct. She reasoned that fear was the mechanism by which people avoided danger. They simply did not go near things they found scary. Therefore, to ensure her family's safety, she needed to become the thing they feared most. Rennie leaned in, her voice dropping to a menacing, spectral tone. She began to chant, "I won't forgive you. I'll never forgive you," repeating the phrase with increasing intensity. The repetition broke the thugs' spirits completely. They scrambled on the floor, begging for mercy. Rennie mentally congratulated herself on her performance, noting that her acting was perfect for an overpowered 3-year-old. The thugs, desperate to shift the blame and end the torment, stammered that it wasn't their fault. They claimed they were just following orders. Rennie seized upon this admission. She asked sharply, "Whose orders?" The thugs, terrified beyond the capacity for loyalty, spilled the truth immediately. They shouted that they were following the orders of Mayor Sherdam. They identified him as the city's boss. Rennie stood amidst the wreckage of the debt collector's office, the name of her true enemy now hanging in the air. The thugs cowered before her, broken by a toddler in rabbit boots, as the chapter concluded with the revelation that the corruption extended to the highest authority in the city. The debris of a shattered structure, a conversation unfolded that was less of a negotiation and more of a terrifying realization for the defeated party. A man, bruised and trembling, confessed that he and his cohorts had been coerced into revealing the mastermind behind their operations. The persistent and annoying debt collectors had pushed the protagonist to a breaking point, resulting in a physical altercation that left the collectors beaten and the roof of the building completely destroyed. The man on the ground, sweat beading on his forehead, stammered out the identity of the person pulling the strings. It was the mayor. The young girl, Rennie, stood over him, her silhouette imposing despite her small stature. She processed this information, visualizing the hierarchy that governed their world. The mayor was the most important person in the town, the individual in charge, the absolute authority within their local jurisdiction. In other words, the man responsible was OSA. The thug on the ground desperately tried to validate his claim, insisting with panic in his eyes that he was speaking the truth and not lying. Rennie regarded him with a skeptical, piercing gaze, questioning whether his words truly held the weight of reality. Under the pressure of her scrutiny, the man's resolve crumbled further. He insisted on the veracity of his confession, tears streaming down his face as he offered the existence of physical evidence. He revealed that proof lay hidden within a safe. Rennie, observing his pathetic state, considered the plausibility of his words. She reasoned that the individual targeting her mother was evidently a person of significant influence. This aligned with the earlier events where the guard had permitted their entry without a standard identity check, suggesting a high-level clearance or corruption. However, she also entertained the possibility that the man was merely spouting whatever fabrication came to mind in a desperate bid to escape her wrath. Her mind then expanded on the political structure of the realm to contextualize the mayor's power. The country operated as a monarchy, ruled hereditarily by a royal family. Beneath the crown were the upper nobility, known as lords, who governed specific territories. These territories were subdivided into areas called cities, overseen by city mayors appointed by the lord. These city mayors were typically family members of the lord or vassals who had achieved great things, granting them non-hereditary noble titles and placing them within the lower nobility. They were often wealthy merchants or civil officials. Further down the chain, large towns within a city's administrative area were governed by town mayors, appointed by the city mayor. Consequently, the town mayor of Slanida also held jurisdiction over the village Rennie resided in. While town mayors governed their specific towns, their influence often extended to surrounding villages. Drawing the attention of such a figure invited endless trouble. The interrogation was abruptly interrupted. A knife skittered across the wooden floorboards. Rennie stood unharmed, having anticipated the attack, while the thug on the ground looked on in horror, denying his involvement. Another figure, hidden in the shadows, berated his subordinate for the failure, questioning how the attack had missed. Rennie, calm and collected, realized that attempting a civil conversation had been a suboptimal method for gathering intelligence. She surmised that appearing even slightly open to reasoning had diminished the fear necessary to keep them compliant. She had assumed that instilling fear alone would suffice, but the interruption proved otherwise. Deciding that the time for talk had passed, she resolved to move on. With a declaration that she would not offer forgiveness, Rennie unleashed her power. She activated Cat's Claws, a skill that manifested as a flurry of kinetic energy. The darkened room erupted in chaos as the remaining antagonists were struck down, screams of "Arg" and "Eek" echoing through the ruins. The result was immediate. Bodies lay scattered, some conscious and moaning in pain, others rendered completely unconscious. Rennie stood amidst the aftermath, hoping she would never have to cross paths with these individuals again. Approaching the debris, Rennie turned her attention back to the leader she had been interrogating. She nudged him, commanding him to wake up. She had exercised restraint during the assault, ensuring he wasn't beaten so severely that he couldn't speak, though he remained groggy. The man stirred, confused by her sudden proximity. Rennie demanded the location of the safe. The man, disoriented, stammered, asking where she had come from, completely baffled by her sudden appearance. Rennie's ability to appear and disappear was linked to the mechanics of her equipment. Wearing the hood of the hermit's robes rendered the wearer invisible to enemies, while removing it restored visibility. The man, shocked by her sudden materialization, could only gasp as she pressed him again about the safe. Rennie explained her deduction. Proof of the debt collector's connection to the town mayor had to be inside it. She noted that one of the collectors she had previously dispatched, referred to metaphorically as having been turned into shooting stars, had let slip details about a safe. Even if her attack had been imprecise, she reasoned that fragments of the safe should have remained, yet her search through the wreckage had yielded nothing resembling it. The man, ignoring the safe, screamed at her, demanding to know the meaning of the destruction she had caused. Rennie demonstrated her power once more to silence his deflections. She announced Cat's Claws, again, slashing at the air. The force of the blow pulverized a section of the wooden floor and debris, sending splinters flying and leaving a cloud of dust. She pointed to the destruction, illustrating exactly how she operated. The man stared at the devastation, cursing the fact that his subordinate had revealed the safe's existence and lamenting that he had never heard of someone possessing such power. Rennie repeated her question with cold persistence. "So, where's the safe?" The man, now realizing the futility of resistance, began to piece together Rennie's motivations. He surmised that she held a personal grudge against Mayor Sherdam. He connected her actions to the recent disappearance of IOUs, realizing that was also her handiwork. Rennie confirmed his suspicions, expressing her disgust for the old coot, who went around blatantly collecting women, describing it as a sick hobby. The man laughed bitterly, noting that a kid, like her, wouldn't understand, but admitted that Sherdam would certainly covet a cat-beast girl like her. He pointed out that individuals of her species were incredibly expensive. The conversation shifted to the consequences of her actions. The thug asked what she intended to do after eliminating them, warning that staying alive in the area would be impossible for anyone opposing Sherdam. He emphasized that Sherdam was the richest person in the vicinity and controlled all the politicians and judges. In this town, Sherdam defined what was right and wrong. The thug mocked Rennie, asking if she thought of herself as a bringer of justice, and warned that Sherdam could fabricate charges against her and dispatch soldiers to hunt her down. He predicted she would be publicly acknowledged as a wanted criminal and would never live a normal life again. Rennie remained unfazed. She retorted that Sherdam was the evil one, regardless of his titles or wealth. She declared that she didn't care if a small-town mayor and his debt collector goons branded her as evil. She announced her intention to go on a journey anyway, so being a wanted criminal in this specific town and its surroundings wouldn't impact her life in the slightest. She viewed this outcome as freedom. As long as no one found out immediately, it was fine. She thanked the man for the information regarding the political landscape and the risks, appearing almost cheerful. With the interrogation concluded, Rennie delivered a final cat punch, striking the man squarely in the jaw. He was sent flying with a pained grunt, effectively silenced. Rennie bid him a firm goodbye, leaving him unconscious amidst the ruins. She then turned her attention to the environment. The man had kept glancing toward a specific area during their conversation, a tell that Rennie's sharp observation skills had picked up on. She approached a section of the floor that looked undisturbed but suspicious. Lifting a heavy wooden plank, she revealed a dark opening beneath. Peering into the darkness, she noted that if this were a game, she would have been forced to check the entire area square by square until a log message appeared. Real life, however, relied on observation. The space below was pitch black. To navigate, she activated an extra effect, Cat's Eyes. Her pupils dilated and the darkness receded, revealing the contents of the hidden cellar. She mused on whether this was how real cats perceived the world, finding the skill incredibly useful for stealth missions where a light source would make her stand out like a sore thumb. She recalled a game item called the fairy lantern, which was easier to use, but utilizing it here would have benefited her enemies by providing them light as well. Descending the ladder into the cellar, Rennie scanned the shelves. They were stocked with sacks and jars, likely food supplies. She searched for something specific, something suspicious that matched the weight of a safe, around 30 kilograms. She spotted a metal box tucked away on a shelf and declared she had found it. As she moved, she reflected on her appearance. The transformation into a cat girl was perfect as a disguise, but the cat's paw gloves she wore were unwieldy and not suited for everyday use. She regretted not wearing them earlier when she was handling delicate items like the healing potion and fertilizer, which she had clumsily dropped. However, wearing such oversized paws in front of her parents was out of the question. Rennie focused on the safe. It was locked, and she realized she didn't have the password. Undeterred, she utilized an extra effect, unlock. The heavy door of the safe swung open with a click. Inside, stacks of paper were visible. She began sifting through them. Another IOU, she muttered, confirming the nature of the documents. As she dug deeper, she found more incriminating evidence. There was an accounting ledger that detailed fraud and embezzlement. More disturbingly, she found receipts and records indicating human trafficking. These documents served as undeniable proof of Mayor Sherdam's misdeeds. Rennie realized that if her mother had been caught by the debt collectors, her name would likely have ended up on these trafficking receipts. Gathering the heavy stack of documents, Rennie prepared to leave. She climbed the ladder and jumped out of the hole in the floor. However, she miscalculated the force of her jump, propelling herself a bit too high. "Whoops!" she exclaimed as gravity took hold. The stack of documents slipped from her grasp, scattering into the air. Panic set in as she realized she was falling and had lost her balance. In that split second, she chastised herself for not putting the items in her inventory, a mistake she had made frequently in the game as well. She had considered organizing them before leaving, but the lack of an escape route in the cellar had convinced her to sort them outside. Now, just like with the potion she spilled on her dad and the fertilizer she dropped on the field, she was dropping the critical documents. As she flailed in the air, trying to convince herself that this is fine, and refusing to be discouraged, she heard a voice cry out, "Watch out!" A pair of arms caught her before she hit the ground. Rennie blinked, disoriented, while her rescuer let out a sigh of relief, saying, "Thank goodness." Rennie looked up to thank the person who had saved her. Her eyes widened as she took in the appearance of her savior. It was a pretty girl with long ears, an elf. The elf confirmed her identity, stating, "Yes, I'm an elf." Rennie was bewildered, noting internally that she currently had 4 ears, her human ears and cat ears, while observing the elf's pointed ones. The elf, breathless and blushing, apologized for her rudeness but immediately addressed Rennie by name, Lady Rennie. She expressed that it was an honor to meet her. Rennie, confused, asked how the elf knew her name. The elf revealed that she had been told by Rennie's mother. This revelation only deepened Rennie's confusion. "Mama told you?" she questioned, shocked that her mother knew an elf. The elf continued, tears welling up in her eyes, confessing that she had been looking forward to this meeting for a long time. She had begun to fear that the day would never come. Rennie, feeling awkward in the elf's embrace, tried to reassure her. "It's okay," she said, trying to regain some composure. She attempted to project an image of strength, reminding herself, and implying to the elf, that she was an overpowered 3-year-old. However, the elf was overcome with emotion. She wept openly, declaring what an honor it was to be patted on the head by Rennie. She stammered about how wonderful and adorable Rennie was. Rennie felt a wave of embarrassment. She had wanted to present a way cooler greeting, yet here she was, having shown a pathetic side of herself by falling and needing to be caught. The elf, however, saw it differently. Through her tears, she insisted that Rennie was really cool. She praised Rennie for the fall, framing it as Rennie catching her, in a metaphorical sense, though she physically caught Rennie. Rennie, mentally checking out of the bizarre interaction, noted that she had no idea why this was happening. The elf's admiration escalated to a fever pitch. She stared at Rennie with shimmering, tear-filled eyes, thinking, she's just too precious. Overwhelmed by the cuteness and the significance of the moment, the elf's capacity to function short-circuited. "I can't," she gasped, before clutching her chest. With a final, "I'm glad to have met you," the elf collapsed, fainting from the sheer emotional overload. Rennie stood over the unconscious elf, apologizing profusely for getting her so distraught, ending the chaotic encounter on a note of utter bewilderment. Gravity reclaimed the small, white-clad figure of Rennie as she plummeted through the cool night air beneath a moonlit sky. The papers she had retrieved, irrefutable evidence of the mayor's evil misdeeds, fluttered around her in a chaotic cloud, descending toward the ground like oversized confetti. A voice cut through the rushing wind, crying out a warning to watch out. Just as the ground rushed up to meet her, Rennie braced for impact, but instead of the hard cobblestones, she landed in a secure embrace. The impact was soft, absorbed by the arms of the elf girl who had intercepted her fall. Rennie, composing herself after the terrifying drop, looked up at her savior. The elf, breathless and flushed, admitted that she had been momentarily overcome with joy at the sight of Rennie, apologizing profusely for getting so distraught during their initial encounter. She asked if Rennie was unharmed, her concern palpable. Rennie, brushing off the incident, shifted the focus to the scattered documents surrounding them. She explained that these papers were the proof they needed to expose Mayor Sherdom's corruption. She noted that the criminal operation had significant backing, admitting that her original plan had merely been to destroy their hideout, but she had stumbled upon this treasure trove of information instead. Now, however, the problem remained of how to manage the scattered evidence. Samu, the elf, immediately volunteered to handle the situation. With a blur of motion indicated by sharp sound effects, she darted around the alleyway. She moved with blinding speed, gathering the papers with efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. She assured Rennie that she would take care of everything and urged her, lady, to catch her breath. Within moments, the chaotic spread of documents was neatly collected. Samu returned to Rennie's side, suggesting they head home immediately, as Rennie's mother was surely worried. Rennie, confused by the sudden shift to the topic of her mother, questioned how the elf knew where her mother was. Samu pointed vaguely into the distance, stating, over here, causing Rennie further confusion as she looked around the empty street. Rennie looked at the elf, bewildered, and asked about the mechanics of their interaction. Samu explained that her cloak possessed the power to erase her presence, rendering her invisible to normal detection. However, she clarified that she could still hear Rennie's adorable voice perfectly well. Samu then turned her observational skills toward Rennie's attire. She deduced that Rennie was not merely wearing a simple outfit but was equipped with other powerful gear. Rennie deflected, stating she had always had them, unable to reveal the truth that she had acquired these items in a game from her previous life. Samu accepted the non-answer with a look of reverence, simply stating that Rennie was truly special and that she understood. However, the tone of the conversation shifted to one of mentorship. Samu knelt to Rennie's eye level, her expression serious. She reminded Rennie that she was still small and had a significant amount of growing left to do. She acknowledged Rennie's incredible power and amazing equipment but introduced a critical caveat. While the equipment should absolutely be used when necessary or in times of danger, Samu warned that relying on it constantly would cause Rennie's body to slack off. She explained that powerful equipment could restrict physical growth, preventing Rennie from developing the muscles she would need as she aged. Rennie, absorbing this new information, asked if that meant she couldn't get muscles. Samu confirmed this, advising that it would be best if Rennie tried not to rely on her equipment so much for mundane movements. Taking the advice to heart, Rennie immediately accessed her inventory. With a digital chime, she unequipped her gear. The visual change was subtle to the naked eye, prompting Samu to remark that she couldn't tell the difference at all, but the physical effect on Rennie was instant. Samu encouraged Rennie, stating that she needed muscles to grow big and suggesting she walk and run using her own strength. Rennie confirmed she was done removing everything except the hermit's cloak. However, as she tried to take a step, the reality of her base stats hit her. Her body felt heavy and sluggish without the magical enhancements. She wavered, her legs trembling under her own weight. Samu watched her struggle, fighting back an internal wave of emotion. She chastised herself for being pathetic and not knowing enough about Lady Rennie's circumstances, but then immediately pushed those feelings aside to focus on the task at hand. She realized Rennie was struggling to walk. Rennie, determined but physically limited, agreed to try her best but admitted she was worried about falling over. She shyly asked if they could hold hands while walking. Samu froze. Her mind raced at the implication of Rennie's small, warm hand touching hers. She stared at Rennie's outstretched hand, her internal monologue spiraling into a panic over how soft and lovely Rennie was. Rennie, interpreting the silence as hesitation, added that if she got tired, she might need to be carried. This request nearly broke Samu's composure entirely. She turned away, clutching her chest and began a breathing exercise, breathe in, breathe out, to calm herself down. She gave herself a pep talk, asserting that she could do this, before turning back to Rennie with a trembling hand. She apologized for her presumptuousness and accepted Rennie's hand, leading her forward. As they walked, they approached a high wall blocking their path. Samu stated they would climb over it. Rennie, looking up at the imposing structure, questioned how they would get back. This prompted a discussion about Elven lore. Rennie asked if elves were colloquially known as sages of the forests, recalling the description from her game. Samu confirmed this title, explaining that their long lifespans, abundance of knowledge, and relaxed lifestyles led to that moniker. She elaborated that elves typically lived deep in forests, isolating themselves from human interaction, which aligned with Rennie's game knowledge of elves creating their own villages. However, Samu revealed there was another title for her kind, the Hunters of the Forest. She explained that while many elves were proficient at manipulating mana for healing magic and knowledge of herbs, often called healing light or aurora, there was a divergent path. Samu herself had chosen to live as an elf who focused on equipment and physical prowess rather than settling in a village. Samu asked permission to pick Rennie up to demonstrate why they were called hunters. Rennie agreed enthusiastically, thinking it sounded fun. As Samu lifted Rennie, she was struck once again by Rennie's lightness and cuteness, forcing herself into another round of deep breathing to avoid collapsing from the emotional overload of holding Lady Rennie's body weight. She steeled herself, thinking, "This is bad. Can't let myself collapse right now." Rennie, noticing the elf's distress, asked if she was okay. Samu regained her self-control, adjusted her grip, and told Rennie to hold on tight. With a burst of kinetic energy, Samu launched herself at the wall. She scaled the vertical surface with incredible speed and agility, defying gravity as she ran up the bricks. Rennie clung to her, eyes wide with amazement, shouting, "Whew," as they cleared the top of the wall and landed gracefully on the rooftops on the other side. They bounded across the architecture, the wind rushing past them. Rennie exclaimed that it was really cool and amazing. From their vantage point on the wall, Samu pointed out a creature in the distance. It was a white rabbit with a single horn on its forehead. Rennie identified it immediately as a uni-rabbit, a starter enemy from the game with levels ranging between 1 and 10. As Rennie confirmed the sighting, the uni-rabbit noticed them and bolted, running away. Samu did not chase it. Instead, she stood her ground and declared, "Here I go." She drew her bow. Rennie sensed a shift in the atmosphere, recognizing the gathering energy as mana. She felt a palpable power emanating from Samu. With a sharp exhale, "Ha!" Samu released the arrow. The projectile moved with such speed and force that it vanished from sight entirely. In the distance, the uni-rabbit was struck with lethal precision. Rennie turned to Samu, eyes sparkling, and told her she was really strong and amazing. She then realized she hadn't asked for the elf's name yet. The elf introduced herself as Samu Alma, apologizing for the late introduction. Rennie happily chirped, "Samu-chan." Curious about the feat she had just witnessed, Rennie asked if Samu had used mana manipulation. Samu confirmed that she had used it both to climb the wall and to shoot the uni-rabbit, explaining that she manipulated mana to heighten her physical strength. Rennie was astounded, admitting she had never heard of that application before. She asked if all elves could do it. Samu launched into a lecture on elven biology. She explained that humans possessed very little internal mana, making manipulation nearly impossible for them. Elves, however, had mana circulating throughout their bodies alongside their blood. This physiology provided them with a vast, easily controllable reservoir of mana, which also contributed to their extended lifespans. Rennie looked down at her hands, pondering her own nature. Her status screen identified her as an elf, yet her ears were rounded, not pointy like Samu's. She wondered aloud if she could perform mana manipulation too. Samu reassured her, explaining that Rennie simply hadn't grown up yet, which limited her ability to display her full power. She expressed certainty that Rennie possessed incredible potential and would be able to access her dormant power once she matured, specifically mentioning the age range of 13 to 16 years old. This information caused a realization to dawn on Rennie. She understood the logic behind an age-related stat modifier. In the game, stats were static at max level, but this world functioned differently. Samu interrupted her thoughts, reminding her to walk using her own strength as instructed. Rennie called up her status screen to verify her hypothesis. The holographic display appeared, listing her name as Rennie Sherm-Gon, race as elf, and age as 3. Her gaze fell upon her stats. The numbers confirmed her fears, 999, minus 97%. A massive negative modifier had been applied to her level 999 stats. Sammy noticed Rennie stopping and asked what was the matter, to which Rennie replied, "It's nothing." Internally, however, Rennie was reeling. The negative modifier hadn't been there before, it only appeared after her conversation with Samuel. She realized that the system wasn't just a static display, it interpreted her own awareness and understanding, assigning numerical values to things she comprehended. This meant her status screen didn't show absolute truth, but rather a reflection of her current knowledge. A smile crept onto Rennie's face. While the minus 97% was a hindrance, the implication was thrilling. Unlike the game, where growth stopped at the level cap, this world offered the possibility of becoming even stronger. The fact that she was an elf meant there was plenty of room for growth. She deduced that if she mastered mana manipulation to circulate mana through her body, she could overcome the penalty and surpass her limits. Determined, Rennie took a step forward. She viewed every step she took on her own legs as a step toward removing that negative modifier. She looked ahead and saw figures in the distance. "Papa, Mama," she cried out, running toward them. Sammy followed, apologizing to the parents for being late. Rennie's father assured her it was fine, while Rennie thanked Samuel. Her mother, relieved, called out Rennie's name, and her father knelt to check if she was hurt anywhere. Then, Sammy dropped to one knee, bowing her head respectfully. "Your Majesty," she addressed Rennie's mother. Rennie's mother responded with grace, saying she was the one who should be grateful. Rennie froze, her brain struggling to process the scene. "Mama is a queen?" she thought, shocked. The title, Your Majesty, echoed in her mind. Her father, holding Rennie, clarified the situation with a smile. He explained that her mother was the former queen of the elves, but was now simply his beloved wife. Rennie looked at her mother, stunned by the revelation of such high status. Her mother, the former queen, smiled gently, radiating a regal aura. Sammy remained kneeling, tears streaming down her face as she watched the family interaction. She was overwhelmed by the sight of the former queen's blissful smile, directed at a human man, weeping loudly in a mix of joy and disbelief. The father looked on awkwardly at the crying elf, noting that they certainly seemed to have their own complex circumstances. The chapter concluded with Rennie safe in her parents' arms, the mystery of her lineage partially solved, and her trust in Samu solidified. The atmosphere thick with the weight of a long-concealed truth finally surfacing. A man and a woman sit opposite a young girl, their expressions grave yet tender, indicating that the time for secrets has passed. The woman, Rennie's mother, leans forward, acknowledging the fatigue that likely grips her daughter, yet pressing on with the necessity of the conversation. The narrative shifts, bridging the gap between the present and a distant, fantastical past, as the father prompts Rennie to recall a specific, seemingly whimsical claim he once made. He asks if she remembers his assertion that he was once the queen of the elves, a statement that a younger, wide-eyed Rennie had accepted with innocent enthusiasm, calling it really cool. The mother, holding the young child in the flashback, offers a gentle reassurance of her well-being, though her eyes betray a deeper complexity. Back in the present, the parents exchange a look of mutual resolve, silently agreeing that the full story must now be unveiled. The father admits that Rennie's physical traits, specifically her rounded ears, an anomaly for someone of Elven descent, had always been a point of curiosity for her, a biological riddle that demanded an answer. He expresses a firm belief in his daughter's maturity, confident that she possesses the emotional fortitude to understand the complexities of their history and, ultimately, to forge her own destiny. The father begins the technical explanation, grounding the story in the magical physiology of elves. He describes how elves naturally manipulate the mana that circulates through their biological systems, a fundamental trait of their species. Rennie acknowledges this, recalling that an acquaintance named Samu had already explained the mechanics of mana to her. The mother then interjects, posing a critical question to Rennie about the fundamental distinction between humans and elves. Without waiting for a textbook answer, she reveals the tragic catalyst of their family's history. She had lost the ability to control mana, a condition that effectively stripped her of her elven identity. The narrative plunges into the gravity of this condition. The loss of mana control was not merely a disability, it was a catastrophic failure of biology, viewed by the Elven society as a dreadful, hopeless affliction. The queen, Rennie's mother, was struck down by this malady, shocking her subjects and the court. The diagnosis was absolute and grim. The condition was universally understood to be a death sentence. In the flashback, the queen lies in a lavish bed, her body failing, while her attendants hover in a state of mourning and pragmatic desperation. They discuss the necessity of selecting a successor to carry on the queen's will, resigning themselves to the inevitability of her passing. The medical history of the elves offered no hope. Every recorded instance of this disease had ended in death, with no known cure ever discovered. Despite the encroaching darkness, the queen harbored a lingering desire, a final wish to live, even as she acknowledged the scarcity of her remaining time. The historical records were sparse but consistent. Only 3 previous cases existed, and all had resulted in swift fatalities. However, fate intervened in the form of a disruption at the forest's edge. The narrative shifts to the queen recounting how she discovered Rennie's father, a human, collapsed and battered on the outskirts of the Elven domain. The human recalls the encounter with a touch of wry humor, noting that the monster he had battled was formidable, leaving him incapacitated. This meeting defied the natural order. Humans were typically barred from the deep forest, their presence forbidden. Yet, the queen, driven by an inexplicable compulsion, chose to intervene. She disregarded the laws of segregation, determined to save the injured human regardless of the consequences. The scene depicts the queen tending to the wounded man, her magic or medical skills applied to his broken form amidst the roots of the ancient trees. He was critically injured, hovering on the brink of death, yet through her efforts, he clung to life. This act of mercy became the foundation of their bond. The father reflects on his paradoxical luck. While being mauled by a monster is objectively unfortunate, it served as the catalyst for meeting his future wife, a twist of fate he considers a blessing. The Elven court, witnessing their dying queen's attachment to the human, chose not to interfere. They deduced that her intense focus on saving him was a manifestation of her final will, and they could not bear to deny her this last solace. Thus, a unique dynamic emerged. The queen and the human deepened their relationship within the sanctuary of the forest, a romance blooming in the shadow of impending death. Under normal circumstances, a human would be expelled immediately, but the queen's condition and her obvious affection created a sanctuary for him. However, not all emotions were warm. The flashback reveals the simmering resentment of the queen's attendants. They watched the blossoming romance with disdain, blaming the human for the situation, their faces contorted with protective fury and grief. The father chuckles nervously at the memory of the hostility he faced, while the mother smiles with a serene, perhaps slightly oblivious, happiness. Rennie, listening to this, wonders if the entire Elven population shared this animosity toward her father at the time. As the queen's condition worsened, the human refused to accept the inevitability of her death. He recalled rumors circulating among adventurers, whispers of a legendary item with miraculous properties. While the elves had surrendered to despair, he remained defiant. The legend spoke of a specific jewel capable of granting any wish. Information regarding its location was fragmented and contradictory. Some claimed a religious sect held it, others pointed to a nation's treasury. However, the father had secured a specific lead. The jewel was in the possession of a dragon. Driven by this desperate hope, the human prepared to leave the forest. He is intercepted on a bridge by Samuel, a young elf who questions his sanity. His wounds from the previous monster encounter had not even fully healed, making a quest against a dragon seem like suicide. Samuel berates him, calling him an idiot for staking everything on an unsubstantiated rumor, her frustration evident in her shouting. She demands to know how he plans to defeat a dragon in his condition. Undeterred, the human proceeds to the Cave of Inspiration, the supposed lair of the beast. Samuel, despite her objections, accompanies him, unwilling to let him die alone. Inside, they encounter the dragon, a massive, terrifying creature with jagged teeth and immense scales, looming over them in the darkness. The human's plan is revealed to be absurdly optimistic. He had hoped to negotiate with the monster, a notion Samuel finds incredulous. The confrontation takes a sudden, comedic turn. The dragon roars, or perhaps ignores them, but the human notices something inconsistent in the cave's geography. He stumbles upon a mechanism or a false wall. To Samuel's shock and the human's surprise, they discover a hidden room concealed within the cave. The transition is jarring. One moment they are facing a lethal predator, and the next, the human is investigating a secret chamber, speculating that the jewel might be hidden there. Samuel, still processing the sheer absurdity of the situation, yells to check if he is still alive. The human explores the hidden room, noting the oddity of the flooring, which appears to be made of wood, a sign of artificial construction in a natural cave. Suddenly he finds it. He holds up an orb, glowing with an internal light. A game-like notification window appears in his vision, confirming the item, "You found a jewel, legendary." The father grins, attributing this impossible find to his inherent good luck, validating his earlier claim. They return to the Elven forest, triumphant. The queen is fading, but the human and Samu rush to her bedside, presenting the legendary artifact. The narrative explains the lore. This jewel is one of 7 that support the world, an item of immense cosmic significance. The human urges the queen to make her wish, his desperation palpable. He begs for a miraculous recovery, envisioning a future where she is cured of her mana disease and restored to full health. He explains his motivation. He simply wanted to save her, to see her cured so she could live a long, strong life as a queen. He believed the jewel's power to grant wishes was the only logical solution. However, the queen's desire diverged from his expectations. She did not wish for a cure that would restore her to her previous state. Instead, she asked the jewel to turn her into a human. The revelation stuns the room. By becoming human, she would lose all her mana, effectively bypassing the disease by removing the biological system that was failing. The logic was sound but drastic. If the mana circulation was killing her, becoming a creature without mana would save her life. The father expresses his shock and confusion. He had wanted her to regain control of her mana, to reclaim her power and longevity. But the queen's motivation was rooted in love and a desire for a shared existence. She wanted to live with him, as an equal, as a human. The elves, witnessing this sacrifice and the salvation of their beloved queen, accepted the outcome. Since her life was saved, they could rationalize the transformation. The jewel did its work, the mana drained from her, and her appearance shifted to match that of a human. The aftermath of this wish created a complicated political situation. The queen, now human, could no longer rule. The official narrative constructed to explain her disappearance was scandalous. The human kidnapped the queen. The father, recounting this, admits to the technicality with a nervous smile, acknowledging he is technically on a wanted list. Rennie is shocked to learn her father is a fugitive criminal in the eyes of the Elven state. Samu, present in the flashback and the conversation, clarifies that this was a cover story for an elopement. The queen had effectively run away with the human, leaving her royal duties behind. Samu teases the father, pointing out that his actions made him the target of every elf sire, essentially declaring him an enemy of the world for stealing their monarch. The father accepts this burden. He admits to using a world-supporting artifact for his own selfish desire to save one life, a choice he acknowledges was heavy. Consequently, they chose a life of exile and anonymity. They settled in a humble cottage, far from the court, seeking a quiet, peaceful existence just for the two of them. It was a difficult transition initially, adapting to a common life, but they eventually found their rhythm. Then came Rennie. The biological incompatibility between elves and humans is a known fact. They cannot produce offspring. Therefore, when the former queen became pregnant, it served as definitive biological proof that she had indeed become fully human. Rennie's birth was a surprise and a relief. She was born a normal human baby, her ears round, lacking the pointed tips of her mother's former kin. However, as Rennie grew, anomalies surfaced. The parents noticed she was strange. She required unusually little attention for an infant, possessing a demeanor that suggested a maturity beyond her years. Her eyes held a sparkle of understanding that unsettled them, leading them to question if she was truly a normal human child after all. The narrative touches on a period of hardship. The father was injured and fell ill, casting a shadow over their domestic bliss. During this time, the parents lived in constant fear. They worried the elves would come to reclaim the former queen, or that human society would drive them away. In their uncertainty and protectiveness, they kept Rennie hidden, isolating her from the world to ensure her safety. The mother reflects on Rennie's role in their survival. She admits that without Rennie, they might not have overcome the challenges of their isolated life. She tells Rennie that her strangeness, her precocious help, her understanding nature, was a blessing. She affirms that she is lucky Rennie is her daughter. Rennie, hearing this, flushes with emotion. She realizes that her attempts to help, even that very day, were recognized and appreciated. Rennie, however, harbors her own internal conflict. She confesses to herself and implies to her parents that she knows she isn't normal. She has always felt different, a divergence from the other children that became more apparent as she entered society. A flashback montage shows Rennie growing up, always slightly out of step with her peers. At her graduation ceremony, while other children and parents weep with emotion, Rennie stands stoic and detached. Her classmates are confused by her lack of tears, questioning her coldness. Rennie rationalizes her reaction logically. They are all going to the same middle school, just in a new building, so there is no reason for sorrow. This pragmatism isolates her. In another scene, during school chores, other students complain about weeding the courtyard, finding it boring and gross. Rennie, conversely, finds satisfaction in the task. She enjoys the efficiency of pulling weeds out by the roots and the tactile sensation of the dirt. When she expresses this, a classmate calls her perceptive, a comment Rennie interprets as praise, only to realize later it might have been sarcasm or a way to offload work onto her. The other children happily leave their patches for her to weed, and Rennie accepts the extra work, thanking them, oblivious to the social dynamic or perhaps simply content with the solitude. Rennie reflects on these accumulated moments of friction. Her refusal to conform, like not wanting to wear a skirt, and her dull reactions drove a wedge between her and her peers. She was constantly told to be normal, yet every attempt to fit in only highlighted her differences. She apologizes internally to her parents for being strange, feeling that her eccentricity is a burden she placed on them. Bringing the conversation back to the present, Rennie voices her insecurity. She asks if she is strange. Her parents do not deny her nature, but they reframe it. They acknowledge her uniqueness but smother it with unconditional love. Rennie realizes that despite her quirks, despite being different, they raised her with care. She expresses her love for them, calling them Mama and Papa with deep affection. The parents reciprocate immediately. The father and mother affirm their love for her, accepting her wholly. The atmosphere lightens, the tension of the revelation dissipating into family warmth. The narrative reveals the purpose of this entire confession. Rennie is preparing to leave. She wants to go on a journey, to see the world that her parents hid from her. The parents accept her decision. They recognize that she has chosen her own path. They embrace her, the father holding both his wife and daughter, assuring Rennie that they will always be there if she needs them. The father grants his permission, telling her to go ahead. As the chapter concludes, the perspective shifts to a hopeful wish for the future. The narration, or perhaps the father's internal monologue, states that if a wish could be granted right now, it would simply be for Rennie to be healthy and merry as she steps onto the path ahead. The final panel lingers on the family, united in love and the bittersweet pain of letting go. Morning sunlight filters into the rustic wooden bedroom, illuminating the small form of Rennie as she stirs from her slumber, her mind immediately racing to catalog the tumultuous events of the previous day. She nestles into her pillow, her thoughts organizing the revelations she recently uncovered, her encounter with the elf Samuel, the resolution of Slanida's financial struggles through the procurement of incriminating documents, and the subsequent reformation of the town's monetary situation. The most earth-shattering discovery, however, lingers at the forefront of her memory, the revelation that her mother is the queen of the elves. Yet, even this royal lineage pales in comparison to the secret of her own conception and her father's past. Rennie recalls the jewel that Samuel and her father discovered, an artifact her father stole to flee with her mother, which her mother then utilized to transform herself into a human. Rennie sits up, considering the biological impossibilities she has defied. Common knowledge dictates that elves and humans cannot produce offspring, yet here she exists, a living contradiction born from the power of the jewel that saved her mother's life and altered her species. She reflects on the irony that the item she obtained in a game has manifested in this new reality, allowing her to be born perfectly normal despite the odds. Her curiosity piques regarding her current condition, prompting her to summon her status window to verify the effects of the jewel in this world. The holographic interface materializes before her, displaying her name as Rennie Sherm and her species as Elf, sealed, confirming her suspicions. Her level remains a staggering 999, though the status explicitly notes the sealed nature of her existence. Analyzing the data, Rennie deduces that the fundamental difference between elves and humans lies in the circulation of mana throughout the body. Although she is biologically an elf, her mana pathways remain entirely blocked, a condition that explains her human appearance and inability to perform mana manipulation. She hypothesizes that her mother shares this condition, their elven traits suppressed by the jewel's magic to facilitate a human-like existence. Rennie stares at the text, Elf, sealed, floating in the air, realizing that the jewel likely functioned by sealing her mother's mana to simulate humanity, a trait Rennie inherited directly. A wave of realization washes over her. She may never perform mana manipulation, leaving her with the physical capabilities of a human despite her elven heritage. However, her mind pivots to a potential solution. Lore suggests the existence of 7 such jewels, sparking a new ambition within the toddler. She formulates a plan to locate another jewel, hoping to wish for the undoing of her seal. Yet, beyond the tactical advantage, a childlike wonder takes hold. She simply desires to see these artifacts, wondering about their size, luminosity, and true colors in the real world. Her heart swells with an adventurous craving, and she solidifies her resolve to seek them out, not just for power, but for the sheer spectacle. The scene shifts to the kitchen, where Rennie's mother, a graceful woman with tied-back hair, notices her daughter's arrival. She expresses concern over Rennie's late night, inquiring if the child rested enough, to which Rennie affirms her well-being but admits to a pressing hunger. As Rennie eats her soup, her mother remarks on the newfound peace in their lives, attributing their safety and her relief from overwork to Rennie's extraordinary display of strength the previous day. Samu, the elf guardian, apparently spent the evening singing Rennie's praises, marveling at the toddler's power. Rennie, sensing an opportunity to discuss the future, asks if her mother is busy. Upon hearing she is free, Rennie broaches the subject of borrowing Samu for a while. Her mother reveals that she and Rennie's father have already discussed the matter with the elf. She gently explains that Rennie's 4th birthday is 6 months away and requests that Rennie delay her journey until then. The mother expresses a heartfelt desire to live together as a complete family, engaging in simple joys like picnics and shopping, activities denied to them previously by their precarious circumstances. Rennie observes the vulnerability in her mother's request and agrees to stay until she turns 4, prioritizing these family memories. Rennie then inquires about Samu's whereabouts. Her mother gestures toward the outdoors, stating that Samu went into the forest but assures Rennie that the elf will appear instantly if summoned. Rennie internally vows not to waste this 6-month grace period. She intends to remain vigilant and eradicate any lingering threats to ensure her parents' permanent peace before she departs. Her focus narrows on the mayor, Shirtam, whom she identifies as the mastermind behind the loan sharks. She plans to settle this score while Samu investigates him. Rennie steps outside and telepathically calls for her guardian. Samu bursts from the forest undergrowth with supernatural speed, sliding to a halt before Rennie, overwhelmed by the honor of a personal summons. Rennie thanks her for coming, but Samu is perplexed as to how Rennie knew she was being called. Rennie explains that Her Majesty, Rennie's mother, informed her of the method. Samu launches into an explanation of Elven sociology to clarify the mechanics at play. She describes elves as one large, communal family where child-rearing is a collective effort. Due to their long lifespans but low birth rates, the protection of the few children born is paramount. This necessity gave rise to the guardian system, where a young elf is assigned to protect a child through a special contract. Samu reminisces about the past, mentioning she was 140 years old when Rennie's mother was born. She reveals a startling hierarchy. Her own guardian was none other than Rennie's mother, the current queen. Rennie's mother, listening nearby, interrupts with a polite but firm correction regarding her age, insisting she is only 130, not 140, highlighting a playful sensitivity about her years. She explains that the guardian contract establishes a telepathic link, allowing communication across vast distances, which is how she summons Samu earlier. Rennie is impressed by this amazing secret of their race. The mother further details how she contacted Samu immediately upon finding Rennie in Slanida and guided the elf to their location. Turning the conversation to Rennie's eventual departure, the mother proposes that Samu accompany Rennie on her journey. She reasons that Rennie, despite her power, is physically small and would attract unwanted attention traveling alone. While she respects Rennie's independence, she admits that having Samu as a companion would greatly ease her maternal anxiety. Furthermore, the guardian link would allow the mother to receive updates on Rennie's life, no matter how trivial, satisfying her desire to experience her daughter's growth from afar. Rennie agrees, finding the idea super cool. Rennie turns to Samu, asking if she is willing to join. Samu, overcome with emotion, pledges her absolute loyalty, promising never to be a burden and to be of use. This triggers a poignant flashback for Samu. She recalls harboring a wish for over a century, to become the guardian for Her Majesty's child. She had trained rigorously to become the strongest elf, solely to be worthy of this role. Her devotion stemmed from deep respect for the queen, who had raised and taught her. When the queen lost her magic and left with a human man, Samu was devastated, feeling her life's purpose evaporate. She admits to hating Rennie's father for taking the queen away, feeling pathetic and powerless in the wake of their departure. However, the moment the telepathic channel reopened and she received the news of Rennie's existence, all grief vanished, replaced by an overwhelming wave of emotion. Samu describes the rush to meet them, and the moment Rennie, bearing the queen's golden eyes and silver hair, fell into her arms, she knew she had found the person she was destined to live for. Back in the present, Samu dissolves into a blubbering mess of adoration, overwhelmed by Rennie's cuteness and the fulfillment of her century-long dream. 2 weeks pass. The narrative summarizes their domestic bliss, picnics, shopping, and family bonding. Meanwhile, Samu formally joins the party and gathers intelligence on the town. Rennie utilizes this time to fortify her home against threats. She constructs substitute dolls, magical effigies designed to take life-threatening damage in place of their owner. Rennie lines an entire shelf with these dolls, which possess a crude, stitched-together aesthetic. Her mother comments on Rennie's peculiar tastes, finding the rows of button-eyed dolls slightly spooky, but Rennie pragmatically notes that since they break after one use, she needs a stockpile. Samu arrives to deliver her report, and the atmosphere shifts to business. She confirms that Mayor Sherdam is indeed the puppet master behind the region's suffering. Samu has analyzed the documents Rennie procured and conducted further surveillance. She details Sherdam's modus operandi. He utilizes money lenders to trap villagers in debt. When the interest becomes unpayable, he seizes the debtors, specifically targeting women and small children, as collateral. These victims are forced to work for him or are sold off to a religious sect. Samu notes that Sherdam has already extended loans to people in Rennie's village, attempting the same entrapment strategy he used on Rennie's mother. Rennie listens intently as Samu warns that leaving Sherdam unchecked will only allow him to rebuild his operation. The mention of the religious sect brings a crucial detail. Rumors suggest this sect possesses a jewel, linking Sherdam's crimes to Rennie's personal quest. Samu expresses uncertainty about the sect's true nature, whether they are genuinely caring for the soul children or indoctrinating them as blind followers. Concerned for the safety of Rennie and the queen, Samu had rushed back to report this immediate danger. Rennie's resolve hardens. She declares it is time to defeat Sherdam to ensure the town is safe for her parents. She invites Samu to accompany her, and the elf readily agrees. The duo moves to the outskirts of Sherdam's estate under the cover of night. Rennie is now dressed in a hooded outfit with cat ears, holding a map. They stand near the outer wall, plotting an infiltration route to the mansion's cellar. Rennie decides against a stealthy entry over the wall. Instead, she opts to dig a tunnel directly from the forest floor to the cellar. Samu questions the feasibility and time required for such a feat, but Rennie reveals her secret weapon. She produces a pickaxe, epic, a tool she distinguishes from the legendary grade she used in her previous game life. She explains that while the legendary version is faster, it breaks after one use, whereas the epic pickaxe offers high durability and sufficient speed for this specific task. Donning the cat's paws of her outfit, which she claims negate the need for physical strength, Rennie hoists the pickaxe. With a determined shout, she strikes the earth, the ground trembling under the force of the epic tool. Deep beneath the earth, the rhythmic thud of excavation echoed through the damp silence of the subterranean layer. A pixelated pickaxe, defying the realistic textures of the surrounding rock, swung with mechanical precision. The wielder, Samu, a small cat beastkin clad in a hooded cloak, decimated the geological barriers before her, transforming solid stone into floating, digital cubes that dissolved into the void. This was not merely mining. It was an infiltration, a calculated breach into the foundations of Mayor Sherdam's mansion using an underground tunnel. Behind the relentless digger, Lady Rennie followed, her elven features illuminated by the faint glow of the tunnel. She consulted a map, her finger tracing the path as she directed the operation, instructing Samu to maintain the trajectory but adjust the elevation slightly downward. Rennie paused, pressing a hand to her forehead as beads of sweat formed at her hairline. A shadow of doubt flickered across her face, her eyes squeezed shut in a momentary grimace of self-reproach. She berated herself internally for wavering, for harboring even a splinter of doubt regarding Samu's capabilities. She had sworn to believe in the small girl, yet the sheer absurdity of tunneling into a noble's estate tested her resolve. Sensing the pause, Samu turned back, her pickaxe resting on her shoulder, inquiring if everything was satisfactory. Rennie snapped back to reality, her expression softening into a reassuring smile as she dismissed her hesitation, framing it as mere wallowing, and refocused on the mission. She promised to keep watch over their rear, guiding them forward. The pace was efficient. At this velocity, The subterranean intrusion would breach the mansion's perimeter momentarily. The rhythmic destruction continued until the dull thud of the pickaxe changed pitch, striking something distinct from the natural bedrock. A wall of manufactured brick barred their path. Samu acknowledged the obstacle with a hum of confirmation. Rennie, interpreting the architecture, adjusted their coordinates, instructing the beastkin to maintain the heading but angle the breach downwards. With her affirmative nod, Samu raised the pickaxe, the digital aura flaring as she swung. The brickwork shattered, not into dust, but into the same digital voxels, clearing a rectangular passage into the unknown space beyond. Dust settled in the dim chamber as the two intruders stepped through the breach. They had arrived. Samu, now standing on a tiled floor, announced their arrival, playfully apologizing for the uninvited entry as she deactivated her stealth capabilities. The sudden intrusion sent a shockwave of panic through the room's occupants. Several women, huddled together in the gloom, recoiled in terror. Their eyes widened, fixation locking onto the cat ears twitching atop Samu's head. To them, this was not a rescue, it was another horror. They viewed the beastkin and the elf as new tormentors or perhaps enforcers sent by their captor. Rennie scanned the room, her gaze sweeping over the stone walls and the huddled figures. Her suspicion crystallized into grim certainty. These were the women Sherdam had purchased, victims held against their will in a subterranean dungeon. One of the women, trembling violently, shouted at them to leave, warning that he would find them. She pleaded for them to flee, insisting the place offered no safety. The fear in her voice was palpable, a testament to the psychological hold the mayor had over his captives. Samu ignored the warning, her demeanor calm and purposeful. She reached into her inventory, retrieving a sack that seemed too large for her small frame. She announced her intention to return the women to their lives, asking them to approach as she listed their names. From the sack, she produced documents, records of the illegal transactions and the fabricated debts Sherdam used to bind them. Rennie stepped forward, her voice gentle yet firm, assuring the terrified group that this was indeed a rescue. She explained that the tunnel they had just created led outside the town of Slanida, offering a direct route back to their respective villages. She added that their families had already been notified, dismantling the fear that they had no homes to return to. To further bridge the gap of trust, Samu began distributing provisions. She handed out sacks containing potatoes, meat, and bread, food sourced from the very families of the victims. She held up a piece of dried meat, explaining with a bright smile that a father had hunted it, and then a potato, noting a mother had grown it. The mention of their families, coupled with the tangible proof of home-cooked food, shattered the women's defenses. Tears welled in their eyes as they accepted the offerings. The taste of the food, familiar and laden with memory, confirmed the truth of the rescue. One woman, taking a bite of the jerky, wept openly, the flavor anchoring her back to a reality she thought she had lost. As the women began their evacuation through the tunnel, Samu and Rennie remained in the dungeon. Rennie surveyed the space, noting the sparse furniture and the oppressive atmosphere. This was where the women had been forced to sleep, a stone box designed to strip away hope. She looked up at the ceiling, deducing their location relative to the mansion above. The layout was strange. The only access to this dungeon was a passageway connecting directly to the master bedroom. It was a private prison, accessible only through a bath and lavatory attached to the mayor's personal quarters. The architectural cruelty implied that the mayor treated these women as personal chattel, accessible only to him. Rennie's expression hardened. The women they had just freed were undeniably beautiful, selected for their aesthetics, further fueling her disgust for the man upstairs. High above them, in the opulent master bedroom, Mayor Sherdam preened before a mirror. He was a grotesque figure, his face dominated by a bulbous nose and an oversized, curled mustache. He hummed to himself, contemplating which of his possessions he would torment that evening. He decided on the rebellious one, the recent acquisition who still had fight left in her. He savored the thought of breaking her spirit. With a lascivious grin, he unlocked the heavy door leading to the spiral staircase and descended into the damp dark. Sherdam reached the bottom of the stairs, expecting to see his prisoners cowering in the shadows. Instead, he was met with silence and an empty room. His eyes bulged, scanning the vacant beds and the stone floor. Panic and rage surged through him instantly. He roared, demanding to know where they had gone. The silence remained unbroken until a voice, cool and detached, answered him from the corner. Samu and Rennie stood there watching him. Sherdam spun around, his face contorting in confusion. He demanded to know who they were. Samu, tilting her head slightly, retorted that his question was irrelevant. The mayor, recovering from his initial shock, sneered at Rennie, commenting on her beauty, his mind instantly categorizing the elf as another potential acquisition. He turned his gaze to Samu, dismissing the small beastkin as insignificant. Without a word of warning, Samu launched herself forward. She did not draw a weapon, she simply extended her fist. "Cat punch," she declared. The blow connected with Shurtum's midsection. The impact did not merely bruise, it defied the laws of physics. A shockwave rippled through the mayor's body. The sound of crunching bone and shattering reality filled the room. Shurtum was not sent flying. He was compressed, his body rigidifying and turning gray as if instantly fossilized. He crumbled to the ground, a statue of his former self, defeated in a single, humiliating motion. Samu stood over the stony remains, dusting off her hands. Rennie, however, looked aghast. She reminded Samu of their discussion in the tunnel, the plan to interrogate Shurtum about the buyer of the children. They needed information on where the trafficked children had been sent. Samu froze. In her eagerness to deliver justice, she had completely bypassed the information-gathering phase. The gamer brain had taken over. She saw an enemy and executed the most efficient takedown, failing to account for the event flags required for the quest. She imagined a system interface hovering in the air, game over. Failed to complete the event in the right number of turns. Rennie sighed, lamenting that the information was now lost. Samu, desperate to salvage the situation and distracted by Rennie's disappointment, tried to argue that the information was worthless compared to Rennie's safety, but the excuse fell flat. She admitted she just couldn't help herself. The target was there, and her instincts fired. But then, a solution materialized in her mind. She opened her inventory interface. From the dimensional storage, she produced a bottle filled with a glowing, iridescent liquid, a legendary healing potion. Samu uncorked the bottle and poured the shimmering fluid over the fossilized remains of Mayor Shurtum. She explained her logic. In games, if you fail an event, you simply retry. Fossils, she reasoned, could be restored. The liquid soaked into the gray stone. A sizzling sound filled the air, followed by a groan. The stone cracked, color returning to the skin as the petrification reversed. Shurtum gasped, coughing and sputtering as he returned to the world of the living, completely bewildered. He touched his face, unable to comprehend that a potion of such magnitude had been used on him. He looked around, disoriented, asking who was there. Samu wasted no time. She stepped into his field of vision, her presence now terrifyingly imposing despite her size. She demanded answers. Shurtum, still reeling from his temporary death, stammered. He saw the cat beastkin and the elf, the reality of his situation crashing down. Samu cut through his confusion, demanding to know why he gathered children and sold them. She accused him of trafficking, her voice leaving no room for denial. Cornered and terrified of another punch, Shurtum spilled everything. He admitted he was merely following orders. He had been instructed to gather children with specific traits, high mana, unique talents, or distinct characteristics. He didn't know the ultimate destination or the purpose. He was a middleman. He confessed that the request had come from higher up, a means for him to gain favor with mayors of larger towns and expand his influence. He ranted about his destiny, claiming he was meant for greater things than being a mere town mayor. Rennie listened with cold disdain. She asked who requested this, but Shurtum pleaded ignorance on the specifics, reiterating that he was promised introductions to powerful figures. He tried to justify his actions, claiming his superiority entitled him to use others as stepping stones. Rennie's patience evaporated. She condemned him, pointing out that he had sold children from his own jurisdiction and tormented women while claiming to be a leader. She surmised that the true masterminds had kept Shurtum in the dark precisely because he was a liability, a useful idiot who knew nothing of the true plot. Having gathered what little intelligence Shurtum possessed, that other towns were involved and the capital might be implicated, Rennie signaled that they were done. Shurtum, realizing his leverage was gone, attempted a different tactic. He saw Samu's strength and, in his twisted worldview, assumed everyone had a price. He offered her a life of luxury. He promised her sweets, toys, pretty clothes, and jewelry. When that elicited no reaction, he offered her someone to do whatever she wanted with, suggesting she could vent her violence on a slave of any race she chose. He tried to appeal to her combat prowess, asking if she liked fighting. Samu stared at him, her expression unreadable. Shurtum, desperate, continued to babble, promising her anything she desired, claiming she would never have to lift a finger again. Samu cut him off. Her voice was quiet but absolute. She told him that nothing he could give would make her happy. She declared that she could acquire anything she wanted by herself. She didn't need him. With a final, "Bye now," she turned away. Sherdam reached out, pleading, but Samu had already dismissed him from her existence. The duo moved to the mayor's office upstairs. The mansion was silent. Samu's sensory skills confirmed no guards were patrolling the immediate vicinity. In the office, they located Sherdam's official seal. With practiced efficiency, Rennie and Samu stamped the release documents for the women, effectively legalizing their freedom. They also forged a letter of resignation in Sherdam's name, ensuring a political vacuum that would force the central government to intervene and appoint a new, hopefully competent, leader. Rennie noted that they had also sent evidence of his crimes to the authorities, ensuring that even if he survived the night, his career and freedom were forfeit. It was a thorough dismantling of his life. Before leaving, Sammy's attention was drawn to a peculiar crystal embedded in the wall near the door frame. It hummed with faint energy. Rennie examined it, identifying it as a mana-triggered switch. She deduced that it was a mechanism to collapse the tunnel passage they had arrived through. It was Sherdam's failsafe, a way to bury his dirty secrets instantly if an investigation ever came close. Rennie realized the depth of his malice. He had locked the women in a tomb that he could crush with the push of a button. Samu asked if she should trigger it. Rennie agreed. Collapsing the tunnel now would prevent Sherdam from pursuing the women and would seal the evidence of their specific entry route, adding to the mystery of the divine punishment that seemed to have befallen him. Samu pressed the crystal. It shattered with a sharp gotcha sound. Deep below, the earth rumbled as the tunnel imploded, sealing the dungeon forever. Mission complete. They exited the mansion, stepping out into the cool pre-dawn air of Slanida. The town was quiet, the clock tower looming in the distance. Samu scooped Rennie up into her arms, moving with a speed that blurred the world around them. Rennie, though initially startled, found herself laughing. The tension of the infiltration evaporated, replaced by the thrill of the escape. She asked if Samu was scared, but the beastkin replied that it was fun. They leaped across rooftops, the wind rushing past them. They landed on a high vantage point, the tiled roof of a building overlooking the town. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. Rennie caught her breath, looking at Samu. A realization washed over her. Throughout the mission, she had felt it, the sheer, overwhelming competence of her companion. Samu had dug the tunnel, defeated the villain, revived him, and orchestrated the escape. Rennie felt a pang of inadequacy. She wanted to help, to be useful, but she felt she was merely tagging along in the wake of Samu's power. Rennie turned to Samu, her expression serious. She spoke of her desire to formalize their bond. She wanted to make a guardian contract. Samu blinked, surprised. She reminded Rennie that an elf could only make one guardian contract in their entire life. It was an irrevocable bind, a choice that defined their future. Samu, in her devotion, felt she already belonged to Rennie without the need for magic. She worried that Rennie was rushing, that she might regret binding herself to a simple cat-beastkin when there were stronger, more fitting guardians out there. Rennie shook her head, dismissing the insecurity. She admitted that while Samu was strong, she made mistakes, like killing the source of information too quickly. But that didn't matter. Rennie confessed that she wasn't looking for the strongest warrior, she was looking for Samu. The connection she felt, the warmth of being saved, and the joy of their shared adventure made the choice obvious. She wanted Samu, flaws and all. Samu's eyes widened, shimmering with unshed tears. The validation struck deep. She had always viewed herself as a tool for Rennie, a servant born to protect. To be chosen not for utility, but for herself, overwhelmed her. She bowed her head, accepting the honor. She recited the vow, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. I, Samualma, vow to be Rennie Sherm Gora's guardian. I swear to protect her from harm, cost it me harm or my life. Rennie knelt before her, matching her eye level. She asked what the ritual required. Samu, flushing slightly, explained that the contract required a kiss on a part of the other party's body. Rennie, flustered but determined, took Samu's hand. She pressed her lips to the beastkin's small, gloved fingers, the contact sealing the first half of the pact. Then, Rennie looked at Samu, waiting. She realized the ritual was reciprocal. Samu had to do the same. Samu hesitated, her face turning a deep shade of red. She looked at Rennie's expectant face, the morning light framing the elf like a halo. Overcome with affection and the solemnity of the moment, Samu didn't go for the hand. She leaned in, closing the distance between them. She kissed Rennie on the cheek. The contact was soft, fleeting, yet it resonated with magical finality. "I love you," the words floated in the air, unspoken but felt in the magical resonance. Suddenly, Samu swayed. The emotional overload, combined with the magical expenditure and the physical exertion of the night, hit her all at once. She clutched her chest, her face flushing crimson. "Too precious," she muttered, her eyes spinning. The sight of Rennie, bathed in the dawn light, having just bonded her soul to Samu, was a critical hit to her gamer brain. Samu collapsed backward, fainting on the rooftop. Rennie gasped, panic instantly replacing the romantic atmosphere. "Samu-chan," she cried out, reaching for her fallen guardian. Below them, the town of Slanida began to wake up. The great clock tower chimed, marking the start of a new day. The sun fully crested the mountains, illuminating the streets where people were waking up, unaware that the tyrant Shurdam was gone and that a new legend had begun on the rooftops above. The world began to move, indifferent to the drama, yet fundamentally changed by the actions of a small girl and her elven lady. Samu lay unconscious, a smile on her face, secure in the knowledge that she would be in this new world today and tomorrow, by Rennie's side. Sunlight pierced the dense canopy of the forest, casting sharp, angular beams of illumination that cut through the shadows of the foliage. The morning air vibrated with the awakening of nature, the rhythmic peep and chirp of nesting birds acting as a natural alarm for the inhabitants of the thatched roof cottage nestled below. Inside the rustic dwelling, dust motes danced in the shafts of light that fell across the wooden floorboards and the simple, sturdy furniture. Rennie Sherm-Gora, the young elf, lay beneath a patterned quilt, her eyes squeezed shut as consciousness began to claw at the edges of her sleep. A voice, disembodied and echoing with a strange, pixelated resonance, intruded upon her slumber, commanding her to wake. The voice did not belong to a physical presence in the room but resonated directly within the mind, framing the morning as the start of a grand quest. It addressed her as hero, urging her to go forth and set off into the great wide world, framing the mundane act of waking up with the gravity of an epic RPG introduction. Rennie's eyes snapped open, the remnants of sleep vanishing instantly as the gamer brain interface, a mental construct visible only to her, declared that today was a very special day. She sat up, the quilt pooling around her waist, and announced to the empty air that she had achieved the incredible milestone of turning 4 years old. This age, she declared with the conviction of a veteran adventurer, was the perfect age to set off on a journey. In the adjacent bed, Samualma, the cat-beastkin guardian, stirred. Rennie greeted her companion with a bright, energetic morning salutation, her small hand raised in a disciplined salute. However, the facade of the hardened hero crumbled almost immediately. Rennie, flushing with embarrassment, stammered an apology for her impolite behavior, the grandeur of her telepathic speech dissolving into the awkwardness of a toddler caught play-acting. She held a scroll in her hands, revealing the source of her heroic dialogue. She had been reading lines from it and projecting them via telepathy to test her new abilities. Samu, far from being annoyed, looked at Rennie with an expression of pure, unadulterated worship. To the devoted guardian, the voice resounding inside her head was not a nuisance but a divine blessing. Samu clasped her hands together, her cheeks flushed, utterly enchanted by the experience of hearing her lady's voice directly in her mind. She internalized the call to adventure with absolute seriousness, interpreting the wake-up call as a sacred decree marking the beginning of their journey. Rennie, observing Samu's ecstatic reaction, questioned why she had felt compelled to recite such dramatic lines, but Samu dismissed the query, stating there was no reason other than the sheer joy it brought her. The beastkin fell backward with a heavy thud, overwhelmed by the happiness of the moment, thanking Rennie for the experience. This interaction served as the first field test of their newly forged bond. Rennie realized that the guardian contract they had completed on the clock tower had evolved their relationship beyond mere companionship. They now possessed the ability to communicate telepathically. However, this power came with limitations. Rennie noted that her awareness of the mana circulating through her body remained sealed, evidenced by the roundness of her ears, a biological marker of her sealed elf status. Despite Samu confirming the presence of mana flow, Rennie could not actively manipulate it, leaving her reliant on the passive benefits of the contract. Rennie pondered the mechanics of their connection, wondering if her sealed state was the very reason the contract had succeeded in the first place. She drew a parallel to her mother, whose own guardian contract with Samu remained active, suggesting that the sealed condition might be a hereditary trait or a specific prerequisite for their family's magical interactions. The telepathy, she explained, operated not as an open floodgate of thoughts but more like a telephone. Only specific, intentional messages were transmitted. This selectivity ensured that their private thoughts remained private, preventing a chaotic broadcast of every fleeting notion between the two. This distinction brought Rennie a sense of relief, allowing her to set off without the worry of constant mental surveillance. Furthermore, the network extended to her parents. Since her mother also shared a telepathic link with Samu, any emergency involving her parents would be instantly communicated to the Guardian, ensuring the safety of the home front while they traveled. The departure time arrived. Outside the cottage, under the bright morning sky, Rennie stood before her parents, a small figure in a traveling cloak and dress. Her father, a sturdy man with a gentle smile, advised her to sleep well and eat plenty to ensure she grew strong. Rennie, pumping a fist into the air, promised to get stronger. Her mother, beautiful and composed, knelt to offer her own guidance, instructing Rennie to alert Samu immediately if any danger arose. Rennie reciprocated the concern, telling her mother not to overwork herself. The scene shifted to a lighter tone as Rennie turned to her father, reminding him to take the dolls, which she had apparently scattered abundantly around the house, hunting with him. Her father laughed, agreeing that taking one would suffice given the sheer volume of them. He then turned his attention to Samu, his expression sobering. He formally entrusted his daughter's safety to the beastkin, asking her to reach out if they ever needed anything. Samu accepted the responsibility with a solemn nod, vowing to protect Rennie with absolute certainty. With a final wave and a chorus of "bye," the two adventurers turned their backs on the cottage and stepped onto the path that led into the forest. As they walked beneath the dappled sunlight of the forest path, the conversation turned to the political aftermath of their previous mission. Samu inquired about the state of Slanida under its new leadership. Rennie explained that the new mayor had been inaugurated recently and was currently in a desperate scramble to restore order. The previous mayor, Shurtum, had left a legacy of corruption, having illegally collected taxes from surrounding villages and driven the inhabitants away to cover his tracks. Although Shurtum had embezzled a significant fortune, the new administration seemed competent enough to handle the financial recovery. However, a dark cloud still hung over the victory. The location of the missing children remained a mystery. Rennie sat on a rock during a break, nibbling on a piece of dried potato, her expression thoughtful. She expressed relief that the town was in better hands but couldn't shake the worry about the trafficked victims. Samu, sensing her lady's distress, apologized for not uncovering the children's location despite her investigation efforts before their departure. Rennie dismissed the apology, grateful for what Samu had managed to achieve. She recalled Shurtum's confession that the trafficking was a means to deepen his connections with his superiors, pointing toward a larger network of corruption. Rennie pulled out a map, her finger tracing the road from Slanida to a larger hub. She reasoned that if Shurtum was building connections, he would have directed his operations toward the regional capital. She identified the city of Rialaga as the likely seat of the city mayor who oversaw the surrounding towns and villages. Rennie proposed they head there, following the chain of command to find leads on the children. Samu agreed, her encyclopedic knowledge of the world kicking in. She described Rialaga as a major traffic hub, a bustling center where merchants, travelers, and information converged. It was the most prosperous location in the region, filled with inns and shops catering to travelers, making it an ideal place for both investigation and sightseeing. Samu admitted she had investigated the city previously but believed Rennie might spot details she had overlooked. Rennie struggled with the pronunciation, stumbling over the name Wialaga and Wialaga before Samu corrected her to Rialaga. The journey would take approximately 3 days, with sufficient towns along the route to ensure they wouldn't need to camp outdoors. The prospect of a comfortable journey to a big city ignited Rennie's excitement. She pointed a finger toward the horizon, declaring, "Wialaga, here we come," with childish enthusiasm, ready to combine the serious business of investigation with the joy of sightseeing. The journey unfolded in a montage of discovery and delight. On the first day, the duo visited a restaurant famous for its meat dishes. Rennie, holding a piece of meat on the bone that was nearly as large as her head, looked absolutely dazzling to Samu. The elf sang praises of the food in a language Samu didn't understand, her face glowing with culinary bliss. Later, Rennie discovered an inn on the outskirts of a town, but her interest was captivated not by the architecture, but by the inn man, presumably the owner or a signboard character, whom she inspected with the intensity of a scholar examining a rare artifact. Samu watched her lady run around inspecting everything, finding the behavior wonderful and validating her belief that Rennie was a being of superior intellect and curiosity. On the second day, the sunlight filtered through the trees, illuminating Rennie in a way that Samu described as the very depiction of a goddess of good harvest. They stopped at a garden to pick fruit, an activity that further deepened Samu's reverence for Rennie's knowledge, which she claimed to be unfathomable. The third day brought them to a village that claimed, "There's nothing here," yet Rennie found profound interest in the back of a simple signboard. To Samu, these eccentricities were not quirks but evidence of Rennie's special nature, reinforcing the Beastkin's view of her charge as a being who saw the world on a different plane of existence. As they progressed, the rural path widened into a proper road, the dirt track giving way to a thoroughfare accommodating two-way traffic. Carts and wagons became frequent sights, confirming their approach to the traffic hub of Realaga. Rennie sat atop a rock, observing the flow of people coming and going, noting the increased volume of transport. Suddenly, the peaceful atmosphere shattered. A voice cried out, urging everyone to run. Panic rippled through the travelers on the road. Rennie turned, confusion etched on her face, only to hear a shout directing attention to the south. There, emerging from the landscape with terrifying speed, was a dragon. The massive reptile thundered toward the road, its movements frantic and aggressive. Samu immediately shifted into combat mode, confirming the threat and activating her inventory with a sharp command. She retrieved her gear, her eyes locking onto the beast. Rennie recognized the creature. It was the dragon that was supposed to be sleeping in a cave, the guardian of a specific jewel. Its presence here, awake and attacking, was a massive deviation from the expected order. The dragon lunged at a carriage on the road, its jaws snapping at the horses. The horses screamed in terror, and the soldiers guarding the carriage shouted in alarm. The dragon, a hulking mass of scales and muscle, loomed over the carriage, its claws tearing into the earth. It ignored the soldiers' feeble attempts to defend and focused its rage on the vehicle. Samu launched herself into the air, shouting, "Cat punch!" as she aimed a blow at the creature. However, the dragon displayed unnatural agility, dodging the attack that had previously fossilized a man. Samu landed, surprised by the evasion. Rennie, realizing that brute force might not be enough, drew her bow. She called out to Samu, announcing her intent to distract the beast. Rennie fired a volley of arrows, but they harmlessly bounced off an invisible shield surrounding the dragon. She analyzed the situation instantly. The dragon had erected a barrier made of mana, rendering physical projectiles useless. She communicated this to Samu, acknowledging that while her arrows wouldn't inflict damage, the continuous barrage would serve to keep the dragon's attention divided. She instructed Samu to maintain the offensive while she moved to secure the safety of the civilians. Rennie sprinted toward the besieged carriage. She peered inside the window, checking on the occupants. Inside, a young girl with dark hair and regal attire sat trembling. Rennie asked if they were all right, her voice cutting through the chaos. The girl, startled to see a small child addressing her amidst a dragon attack, stammered that they were fine. Beside her, a handmaid intervened, panic in her eyes. She addressed the girl as "Your Highness," revealing the passenger's royal status, and tried to prevent her from answering the stranger. The handmaid insisted that they, the servants, should handle the communication. The royal, however, overruled her servant. She looked at Rennie, desperation replacing fear. She ignored protocol and demanded to know what was happening outside and, more importantly, where her soldiers were. The situation was dire. The royal guard had seemingly failed or been overrun, leaving the carriage vulnerable to the rampage of a mana-shielded dragon. Rennie stood her ground by the carriage window, the sounds of Samu battling the beast echoing behind her, as she prepared to manage the emergency. The volume concluded with the tension at its peak, the fin marker signaling the end of this chapter of their adventure.